Chapter 210. Old Foulin put away the contract as he watched Charles leave. Dudien helped him to go upstairs to the study room. He put the contract into the drawer and looked at Dudien. "We have collected enough money to rent the passage outside the giant wall. How are you doing? When are you going to go outside the giant wall?" Dudien thought for a moment. "In a few days." "Well, you get ready. Today I will go to the Holy Church and choose the nearest passage to our family." Old Foulin nodded and deeply looked at him. "You have to think about it clearly. Once you rent the passage, the 100,000 gold coins will be gone." Dudien faintly smiled. "What? Are you reluctant to part with it?" "Of course not." Old Foulin smiled and looked into his eyes. "I don't know if it's right or wrong to bet all the money on you. I hope I'm not wrong about you." "Even if I'm wrong, you have no choice," Dudien said. Old Foulin sighed and didn't say anything. Now that he had enough money to rent the passage outside the giant wall, Dean began to prepare his own equipment. His bow and arrows were enough for an intermediate night. Hunter's protective armor was sold in the Temple of Elements. It was 10 gold coins for a primary hunter and 100 gold coins for an intermediate hunter. It was a basic standard armor. It was black like gel and had a slight radiation resistance effect. "I have a bow and a foldable bag to store materials. I need to buy a set of senior hunter's armor, which is worth 1,000 gold coins. The rest is the equipment to hunt monsters. I can carry 20 kilograms of gunpowder. Well, it's a bit weak to rely on gunpowder alone. The explosion will be too loud and will attract other monsters. I have to rely on the bow and arrows. Well, I have to make 2 bundles of fine iron arrows." Dean rode to a blacksmith's shop in Yardtown. He wrote down the number of arrows and materials he needed on an order form and paid the deposit. Noon. Old Foulin's carriage came back. Dudien smelled his scent and rushed to the hall. He was about to ask when he noticed Old Foulin's ugly face. "What happened? Did the price increase?" Old Foulin looked at him with a complex expression. He slowly shook his head and went back to the hall. "Let's go upstairs and talk." Dudien immediately helped him to go upstairs to the study room. Old Foulin looked back at Dudien and sighed. "The rental price hasn't changed. I've asked and found out that the Holy Church has opened a total of 18 passages to the outside of the giant wall. The other 6 consortiums and the military have 1 or 2. Some of them have rented 3 passages. Now only the last 3 passages haven't been rented." Dean was surprised. He didn't expect that there were so few passages to the outside of the giant wall. "Aren't there 3? Are they not willing to rent them out?" Old Foulin smiled. "It's not that they don't want to rent them, but no one wants to rent them. The 3 passages are abandoned. One leads to a place where there is a lake. According to the Holy Church, the lake is full of ferocious monsters. Some of them are amphibious monsters. They usually lie in a small open space outside the passage to bask in the sun. They are likely to be attacked by monsters as soon as they go out, so no one wants to rent them." Dudien suddenly understood. Indeed, the hunters had no way to deal with the underwater monsters. Even if they tried to poison the lake, it would be difficult. The first reason was that the lake was too large and it was difficult to find such a strong poison. The second reason was that the monsters had mutated characteristics. Poisoning slowly would lead to the monsters mutating again. Moreover, there were some powerful poisonous monsters that ate poison as food. They weren't afraid of poison at all. In the old days, ordinary animals such as toads and lizards weren't afraid of poison. The second passage is a wasteland. There is a high mountain outside the passage. Behind the passage is a plain. There are few monsters living there. Moreover, most of the monsters living on the plain are poisonous. It is extremely troublesome to hunt them down. Therefore, no consortiums are willing to rent them. After all, it costs 100,000 gold coins a year to rent such a passage. Old Foulin sighed. As for the third passage, no one has chosen it. According to the Holy Church, This passage has already been sealed.
Sealed?
Why? Dudian was puzzled. Old Foulin smiled. This passage is the same as the others. There are ruins outside. However, it is said that the monsters inside are extremely terrifying existences. They are comparable to other consortiums in Area Zero. Only a whole team of senior hunters can go inside to hunt. Otherwise, a single senior hunter would be in danger of dying. More than 10 years ago, this passage was rented by Huasheng Consortium. They sent 3 senior hunters and 2 intermediate hunters to go inside to hunt. However, they didn't expect that they would come back in just a few days. But only one senior hunter came back. It is said that he risked his life to escape. His body was seriously injured. Later on, he became an intermediate hunter in Huasheng Consortium. After a few years, he transferred to the hunter school to teach. He no longer went outside the giant wall. This incident alarmed the various consortiums. From then on, no other consortiums rented the passageway. Not long after that person returned, the Huasheng Consortium cancelled their lease of the passageway. After all these years, the Huasheng Consortium's economy has fallen behind a lot. From being one of the top 3 consortiums, it's now at the bottom of the list. Sigh. Old Foulin couldn't help but sigh as he talked about the past. Dean's face slightly changed. There were 3 senior hunters and 2 intermediate hunters in the team, but only one of them managed to escape. The monsters on the other side of the tunnel were a little too terrifying. Do we have to rent the passage outside the giant wall? We can use the money to make a living. We can slowly accumulate it. Old Foulin looked at Dudian. Dudian didn't seem to hear Old Foulin's words. After a moment, he gritted his teeth and said, "We will rent the 3rd passage." Old Foulin's eyes widened. What did you say?" "We will rent the 3rd passage." Dudian clenched his fist. His eyes were firm as he repeated. Old Foulin suspected that he didn't hear wrong. He couldn't help but shout, "Didn't you hear what I said?
Do you think that I am deceiving you?"
Chapter 211. Opportunity. Old Foulin's face slightly changed as he heard Dudian's words. "What do you mean?" Dudian replied. "Although it is risky, but I mentioned before that I know an alchemist. He told me a simple formula but extremely destructive alchemy. If we use this alchemy to hunt the monsters, then there is some hope to clear the area outside the passage."
Alchemy?
Old Foulin was startled as he thought of the mysterious alchemist who helped Dudian make the matches. He hesitated. "Will it work? If he finds out that you used the formula he gave you to make it, will he blame you?" The Ryan family was destroyed in the hands of alchemists. Old Foulin had a high fear of the evil alchemist. Dudian replied, "I have helped him a lot. He won't mind such a small thing." Old Foulin looked at him. "Helped him a lot? Before you went to prison?" "A long time ago," Dean said vaguely. He thought for a moment and said, "If things go well, then we have to prepare some gifts to thank them." Old Foulin nodded in agreement. "Yes, even if he doesn't mind, gifts will always improve his goodwill." Dudian looked at him. "Give me 1,000 gold coins. I'll buy the materials." "All right." Old Foulin didn't think much about it. In addition to the 100,000 gold coins for renting the passage, they still had 10,000 gold coins in their hands. It could be said that they had bet all their capital on Dudian. Dudian went downstairs to find Barton and the other 2. He took them out of the castle. He didn't smell any traces on the road, so he drove to other towns. He purchased sulfur and saltpeter from each town and transported them to the small workshop where the matches were made. Since the signing of the contract with Scott, the rented small match workshop was also closed. The 20 slaves bought in the workshop were all transferred to the Ryan castle and became servants. Dudian asked Barton and the other 2 to move the materials to the small workshop. Gunpowder was different from matches, although they were both alchemy products, but it belonged to a forbidden technique. He could only trust Barton and the other two to make it. Wear masks and gloves. Dudyan bought all the tools and taught them how to mix them. A few days later, Dean returned to the Ryan castle and looked for old Foline. Now we can rent the passage outside the giant wall. Is everything ready? Old Foline asked in a hurry. Dean nodded. Everything is ready. Old Foline nodded. Okay, I'll go. He called the butler and prepared the carriage to leave the castle. Old Foline returned to the castle in the afternoon. He brought back a contract with him. It was a contract to rent the passage to the giant wall from the Holy Church. There were many regulations and matters that needed to be paid attention to. For example, if the passage wasn't closed and monsters broke in, then the Ryan family would be responsible for the losses. From today onwards, the loan will end at this time next year. Old Foline looked tired. He looked at Dean. Although the money has been used up, but you shouldn't feel too much pressure. If you encounter a danger or a monster that you can't match, then just avoid it. Don't force yourself. We can slowly fight for the money. Dudyan looked at the old man and sighed. He patted the old man's shoulder. Don't worry too much. I will be fine. If there is an accident, then you can dissolve the consortium and find another consortium to rely on. Even if it is difficult for the Ryan family to return to the glorious days of the past, you can still squeeze into the ranks of the second-rate aristocracy. At least your life won't be as restrained as it is now. This is a matter for the future. I believe that you can come back. Old Foline patted the back of his hand. You must come back. Do you understand? Dean deeply looked at him and nodded. He pulled back his palm and turned away. Sander, who was standing behind, silently looked at the back of the youth. Although he felt a little strange when Dean patted old Foline's shoulder. It was as if his father was the younger generation, but at the moment he saw Dean's lonely back. Old Foline had told him everything about the Ryan family. He also knew what kind of changes the youth had brought to the Ryan family in just over a month. In just over a month, he had earned 100,000 gold coins. It was the first time that he had met such a talent. Compared to the young masters and ladies of the aristocratic families who grew up in the greenhouse, he didn't know how much better he was. If he was cultivated well, then the future would be bright. Unfortunately, the Ryan family was like a wasteland. There was no way to provide for him. He carried a bow and a backpack on his back. He rode a horse and went to the small workshop. Barton and the other two were already waiting for him. Is everything ready? Dean asked Barton. Barton wiped the sweat from his forehead. It's ready. It's loaded into the carriage. We can leave at any time. Dudyan nodded. Barton will follow me. Both of you go back and study hard in the Ryan castle. Whether it's knowledge or dealing with things. Crone and Joseph looked at each other. I have heard that the passage outside the giant wall is extremely dangerous. Do you really want to go alone? Dean looked at the concern on their faces. He felt warm in his heart. If you are strong enough in the future, then I won't have to personally come out. So work hard and don't be lazy. Don't forget the humiliation you have suffered. Don't forget the goal you have set. Be a man of the world. The three of them shook and nodded. Dean smiled as he rode his horse to lead the way. Patton jumped into the carriage, shook the reins, and followed close behind. Crone and Joseph stood on the street and watched the two of them leave. They returned to the Ryan family together until the shadow of the carriage disappeared at the end of the street. Dean took out the map and rode all the way out of the commercial district. He came to the wilderness. Occasionally he would encounter tigers and wolves in the wild, but they were all killed by him. He took out the medal of the Ryan family from the mezzanine of the hunter's armor and handed it to the guard. The guard on duty of the fortress looked at it and let him pass. He went out of the fortress and entered the radiation zone. After a few hours of riding, Dean finally arrived in front of the giant wall passage that old Foline had rented. He saw a towering giant wall standing between the sky and the earth. With his current eyesight, He could see the top of the giant arm. It was more than a kilometer high. It must be known that some of the famous buildings in the old era were only a few hundred meters high. Of course, high-rise buildings were for people to live in. They were hollow inside. The difficulty of building them couldn't be compared to the walls. Barton was shocked to see the giant wall up close for the first time. He didn't expect that the word giant wall could be used to describe it. Chapter 2:12. Other consortiums received the news as Dudian went to the giant wall passage. Old Foulin actually rented the giant wall passage? Or is it the death passage? Several members of the Scott consortium received the news. They were stunned. They didn't think that old Foulin would dare to rent the giant wall passage. Not everyone could afford to pay 100,000 gold coins a year. Although renting the passage would make money quickly, but the New World Consortium only had one hunter. It's crazy. Old people are crazier than us. Is he planning to go all out before he dies? The hunter they sent seems to be the new inventor we signed this time. I hope he won't have an accident or we will suffer a big loss. Old Foulin is crazy. Several members of the Melon Consortium smiled. Melon Consortium. Old Foulin rented the giant wall passage? When Edu received the news, he was a little shocked. But he quickly fell into deep thought. 10 years ago, the Huasheng Financial Group suffered a great loss in this tunnel. No one dared to rent it for so many years. Did they think that after 10 years, the terrifying monsters living outside the tunnel would leave? Stupid! Old Foulin has lifted a stone and smashed his own foot. In addition to the Scott and Melon consortiums, the other consortiums were shocked when they got the news. The foundation of the New World Consortium was cleaner than their faces. So far they had only recruited one intermediate hunter. According to the investigation, this intermediate hunter didn't have the light physique. This meant that the more times they hunted, even if they returned safely each time, they would eventually die young. The accumulated radiation in the body would completely erode the internal organs and cause them to rot and destroy. Ryan family has made the wrong move. An old man from Huasheng Consortium sighed softly. Dean saw the two Knights of Light who were guarding the passage. Although there was no one around, the two knights stood straight as if the overgrown wasteland in front of them was the king's podium. Their expressions were cold and they didn't talk to each other. Please stop. One of the Knights of Light on the right side shouted as he saw Dudian riding a horse. Dudian dismounted and came to the front of the Knights of Light. He showed his medal. The 9th passage has been rented by the New World Consortium. This is my hunter medal. His hunter medal was still a beginner medal. The knight on the right took a look and looked at Dean. He saw that Dean was dressed as a hunter. He looked at the carriage and asked, "What is this?" "This is what my consortium gave me for hunting," Dudian said. The knight on the right frowned and looked at Dean. "Where are your teammates?" Dean said. "I'm the only hunter in our consortium." The knight on the right looked at Dudian and said, "This passage is different from the ones you have entered before. The area outside the passage is equivalent to the zero area of other consortia. You are just a primary hunter. It is better to go back. Don't die in vain." Dudian asked, "I heard that it was like this 10 years ago. Is it still like this?" "Of course," the Knight of Light said without hesitation. "Monsters are like beasts, they are territorial. When we are on duty, we can occasionally hear howls coming from outside the passage. It is definitely not an ordinary monster. You should go back quickly." Dudian nodded and looked at the two. "The consortium sent me here. There is no way to go back. Thank you for your kind words." He took back his hunter medal and looked at the two. "I'll have to trouble you to send my friend back so that he won't encounter danger in the radiation zone." The Knight of Light frowned as he saw that he couldn't persuade Dudian. "He is an ordinary person. We will protect him." Dudian nodded. Although the Knights of Light didn't like hunters, but they had an excellent attitude towards ordinary civilians, especially the believers of the Holy Church. Dudyan went forward and opened the heavy iron gate on the ground to reveal the passage inside. He opened the carriage and moved the boxes of goods into the passage. "What is this?" the Knight of Light who was standing next to him asked. Dudyan casually said, "Our consortium has been inspired by the Lord to research things to hunt monsters." The Knight of Light frowned but didn't say anything. After all, they were the private goods of other consortia. They were only responsible for checking the goods that were brought back from outside the giant wall. As for the goods that were brought out of the giant wall, it was up to each consortium. After a moment, the goods were moved into the passage. There were a total of 12 boxes. "I'm going. You follow them," Dudyan said to Barton. Barton was worried. "You have to be careful. Don't try to be brave." Dean smiled as he closed the iron door and entered the passage. Inside the corridor, there were 2 cheap oil lamps that emitted a faint light. The beautiful faces of the goddess of hunt and the goddess of harvest were engraved on the wall. They were like witches hidden in the shadows. The smile on his cheeks was a bit ferocious. Dudyan didn't pray to the goddess before each trip like other hunters and scavengers. He carried the boxes of gunpowder to the steps outside the giant wall. He put his ear on the iron plate and listened quietly. The process lasted for about 15 minutes. He didn't hear any movement nearby. He slowly opened the iron plate's lock. He put the key in the inner layer of the armor and gently pushed the iron door open. Dudyan glanced outside. There was a vast wilderness outside the passage. There were some stones on the ground. Although they were covered by lush plants, he could still see that the shape of the stones was extremely huge. Some of them were covered with moss. They looked like collapsed buildings. From this point of view, it was not a suburb. Dudyan couldn't help but think that the giant wall was built in the city. It looked like a knife that cut the urban area. Dudyan didn't rush to expose his body. Instead, he inhaled the air. Through rapid breathing, he inhaled the air to the mucous membrane of the olfactory cells at the upper end of his nose to make his judgment more acute. The smell of decay. This is an undead? Dudyan soon smelled some sparse old rotten smell. The smell was so deep that it was like it was frozen. So he could judge that it was not an ordinary corpse, but an undead. Only the undead with cold crystals in their skulls exuded this strange frozen rotten smell. Dudyan was a little surprised. He didn't expect that there would be undead outside. Didn't those horrible monsters like to eat them? Or had those horrible monsters left here? It seems that after 10 years, there have been some changes outside. Dudyan secretly thought. He continued to sniff for a moment. In addition to the smell of the undead, there were some other strange smells. They were scattered far away, at least 20 miles away. Although his physique had been enhanced, his sense of smell did not increase exponentially according to his physique. The farther the smell was, the thinner the volatilization in the air was, and then it rose into the air. It was almost difficult to smell. So there was an upper limit to the sense of smell. Unless his physique reached an extremely incredible inhuman level, he could break the upper limit a little. Dudyan firmly remembered the places where the smells were. Then he gently pushed open the iron door, moved all the gunpowder boxes on the steps, closed the iron door, and locked it from the outside. He didn't carry the key with him, in case he lost it. Instead, he went back to the giant wall 7 or 8 meters behind him. It was full of weeds. He dug a pit and buried the key in it. Chapter 213. Dean opened the folded bag on his back, and pulled out a roll of tarpaulin. He covered the gunpowder boxes with it, to prevent the rain from soaking the gunpowder. Then he held 2 of the gunpowder boxes, and walked towards the weeds in front of the ruins. Because no one opened the way, the ground outside the giant wall passage was full of weed. Some of the soil was soft and wet. Dean was extremely careful in every step. In the absence of information and maps, he could only rely on himself to explore. In other consortia, to clean up such an unknown area, they would often send some vigorous hunters who had the ability to hide and save their lives first to inquire about the information. After all, the consortium's hunters were limited. Even if they sent 7 or 8 intermediate hunters, it was still not enough to fill the gap of the teeth for the huge number of monsters outside the giant wall. Along the way, he occasionally saw some large objects protruding from the weeds. They were covered with moss and vines. Dean could smell a very faint odor from inside. He estimated that it was not covered with stones, but the rotten bones of some monsters. When Dean carefully passed through a bush, he suddenly heard a very slight rustling sound, like the sound of a breeze. But Dean's heart suddenly became cold and awe-inspiring. His face changed, and he hurriedly dropped the gunpowder box, turned around, and retreated. At the same time, from the grass suddenly jumped out a slender green shadow and rushed toward Dean. Dean hurriedly pulled out the sword from his waist and waved it. The slender green shadow was blocked by the sword and fell on Dean's body. The body flashed and submerged into the grass, disappearing without a trace. Dean's face changed. Although he did not see the whole thing, he saw the snake tail that was exposed outside the grass when it disappeared. It was covered with green scales, exactly the same as the green grass, but the color was brighter. At first glance, he knew it was a highly poisonous snake. The most important thing was that he could not smell the smell of the other party. Fortunately, the speed is not very fast. It should not be too high-level monster. Dean secretly rejoiced in his heart. At the same time, he became more careful. He scanned the surrounding grass and slowly moved to the side of the gunpowder box. He used the sword to open the box lid. Inside was a box full of black gunpowder. Throw a match and it would be ignited in an instant. He used a sharp sword to dig out the gunpowder and sprinkled it on the surrounding weed. Immediately, the smell of gunpowder filled the air. Dean's eyes coldly swept around, but his nose quickly distinguished the surrounding smells. Soon, he smelled a smell of black gunpowder moving slowly. Murderous intent flashed in his eyes. He inserted the sword into the soil under his feet, grabbed the bough with one hand, and drew an arrow with the other. His movements were as fast as lightning. The arrow was already loaded, and he suddenly shot it toward the grass. Puff! The sharp sword flew past, and the underbrush suddenly surged violently. The dense grass that was half a meter tall suddenly parted, and like a sharp gust of wind, it quickly flew into the distance. Dudian immediately saw a 4 to 5 meters long python twisting and running in the grass. There was an arrow stuck in its upper body. Its whole body was covered with bright green scales. It was very easy to confuse it with the grass. Dean was not polite and quickly aimed the arrow. Puff! The second arrow suddenly flew out. The green poisonous python twisted and swam to nearly 50 meters away. The arrow came in an instant and nailed to the place where it was swimming. It stabbed diagonally from the back of the skull, penetrating its head and nailing it to the ground. Dean was relieved. He pulled out the sword and slowly walked over. He saw the green poisonous python's body was still twisting weakly, and its tail was constantly curling. Dean's attention was distributed around to avoid other monsters waiting for an opportunity to attack. Although his sense of smell could smell some monsters with strong smell, some monsters were good at hiding and sneak attacks, so he couldn't rely too much on his sense of smell. While guarding the surroundings, Dean cut off the head of this low-level monster. From its appearance, it looked a bit like the jungle snake in the Monster Atlas. Its fangs were highly poisonous. An adult jungle snake was a level 12 existence. This one was obviously a juvenile, and its hunting level was around 4 to 6. It was slightly stronger than ordinary undead. Its skin and scales are good materials for making armor and leather clothes. It's worth more than a dozen gold coins. Dean squatted down and cut its body with the dagger tied to his leg. He quickly peeled off its skin, then cut its head and took out the 2 fangs. There was translucent mucus behind the groove of the fangs. He turned out tweezers and a box from his bag, put the 2 fangs into it, and put them into his bag. After doing this, Dean rolled up the snakeskin and put it away. Then he returned to his original place, picked up his 2 boxes of gunpowder, and continued to move forward carefully toward the direction of the nearest undead according to his sense of smell. After coming to the ruins of the street, weeds could be seen everywhere in the cracks on the road. Dean looked at the moss-covered cars parked on the side of the road. The nearest undead was locked in one of the small cars. The rear window of the car had been broken, and moss and plants had crawled in. Dean put down the gunpowder box and looked around. His field of vision was quite wide. Even if there was a monster that couldn't be smelled by smell, he could see it with his vision. Without hesitation, he took out his bow and arrow, aimed at the driver's seat of the car, and quickly pulled out the arrow. Puff! The sound of glass breaking resounded. Although it was dark inside the car, Dean could still clearly see that there was a middle-aged undead on the seatbelt. It seemed to be in a sleeping state. His arrow hit its throat, but it didn't kill it. He immediately added another arrow. This arrow hit its head, and the middle-aged undead who was struggling to wake up suddenly died on the spot. Dean quickly stepped forward, pulled out the arrow, cut off the head of the undead, and dissected it. The cold crystal in the head was in the initial state of melting. The flesh and blood around the cold crystal was releasing temperature and decaying at a very slow speed. Dean took out the cold crystal and glanced at his left hand. Last time, excessive absorption of the cold crystal had caused his left hand to be eroded by the cold crystal. Later, he was roasted on the gunpowder, causing the pain nerves to be completely lost. He didn't know if he could continue to absorb it directly. He thought that he would try to absorb one first. If it worked, he would absorb a small amount at a time. Although he knew that there were some risks in doing so, directly absorbing the cold crystal was far greater than using God's blessing. He cut his left hand with another clean dagger and put the cold crystal on it. Soon, the cold crystal touched his blood. Like ice and snow meeting fire, it gradually melted and turned into a liquid that penetrated into the wound. Because his left hand had lost feeling, Dean didn't feel anything strange. He only felt that his body had the feeling of absorbing the cold crystal for the first time. It seemed that his energy was more vigorous than before. He breathed a sigh of relief and stopped the bleeding on his left hand. Looking back, he saw an undead slowly coming from the corner of the street. It seemed that the undead was attracted by the sound of glass fragments. He pulled out his bow and arrow and was about to shoot, but suddenly his face changed slightly. He saw that the undead who came out from the corner was extremely tall, about 3 meters tall. It had long hands and feet, a very thin body, a hunched back, and large eyes. There was only a little scarlet color in them. The color of the eyeball was pure black. On its arm, from the back of the palm to the elbow, there was a raised sickle, like the dorsal fin of a shark. The face of the undead was that of a young man, but the skull and the skin of the face were extremely long, and the expression was extremely depressed and gloomy. Sickle undead? No, sickle undead physique is not so tall. Was it a tall person when he was alive? Dean's face changed slightly. Seeing that the undead noticed him, he hurriedly shot an arrow. Distance is a weapon. Whoosh! The arrow broke through the air and flew out. The large sickle undead was expressionless. Puff! It was nailed to the face by the arrow. The arrowhead shot through the cheekbone but was stuck in the bone. It slowly raised its hand, grabbed the arrow, and pulled it out. The scarlet pupil in its eye socket seemed to have awakened, glowing with a blood-red light. Its body swayed like a human-shaped spider as it rushed over. Its mouth was wide open, and the corners of its mouth were torn, causing its upper and lower jaws to open 180 degrees like a snake. Chapter 2:14. So fast. Dean's pupils shrank, and he hurriedly put the arrow to aim again. However, at this moment, he suddenly felt that his past training was a bit ridiculous. The target was fixed, and at this moment, this large sickle zombie was moving at high speed, as fast as a ghost, and its body was moving in an abnormal human posture. It was swaying and twisting, unpredictable, and it was difficult to predict its trajectory. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and his eyes stared at the swaying body of the zombie. A total distance of about 120 meters, until the large sickle zombie ran nearly halfway. He barely found a trace of prediction, and the arrow whistled out. With a whoosh, the distance of less than 60 meters was covered in the blink of an eye, hitting the chest of the large sickle zombie. The penetrating force brought its body to a sudden stop, and then it recovered. It opened its mouth to the extreme, issued a hoarse roar, and rushed toward Dean. At the same time as Dean shot the second arrow, he quickly pulled out the third arrow, turned and quickly retreated. While retreating, he was also quickly predicting its trajectory. When the distance between the two was about 20 meters, the third arrow quickly shot out. Puff! The arrow hit the forehead of the large sickle zombie. The arrowhead pierced a few inches, but it was stuck on the top of the head, and did not penetrate. What a hard skull! Dean's face changed slightly. Seeing that the zombie was about to pounce in front of him, he quickly put away the bow and arrow, pulled out the sword from his waist, and stared at the swaying arm of the zombie, judging the posture of the first attack. The distance between the two was less than a second, and they quickly approached each other. Roar! With the roar of the large sickle zombie, the strong stench rushed to Dean's face. It raised its right arm high, and the sickle bone fin protruded from its little finger to Dean. Dean hurriedly ducked and lifted his foot to sweep its lower leg. However, he did not pay careful attention to the legs of the large sickle zombie. At this moment, the legs and feet were naked, and the soles of the feet were huge and rough. Gray scales suddenly appeared on the feet, spreading to the knees. Dean's foot swept on it. It was like kicking a steel plate. It was very painful, but his strength had reached the level of an intermediate hunter. The sweeping force immediately tripped the large sickle zombie. At the same time, Dean rolled over to avoid being climbed. At the same time, he quickly climbed up with his palms on the ground, turned over, and waved the sword to cut the zombie's neck. With a thud, the blade cut into the flesh and blood, but it suddenly got stuck halfway through. Dean's face slightly changed. He didn't expect its cervical vertebrae to be so hard that even the newly forged fine iron sword couldn't cut it. Although surprised, Dean was not in a daze. He saw that the large sickle zombie seemed to be conscious. It roared in pain. Although its body was lying on the ground, its arms, which were about 2 meters long, swept over quickly. Dean quickly let go of the sword and stepped back to dodge. He turned around and quickly glanced around. He didn't find any tall buildings or suitable terrain for shooting. His face changed slightly. At this time, his body was faster than his brain's judgment. He took the lead and ran to a pile of moss-covered rock. At the same time, the large sickle zombie had climbed up, roaring and chasing after him. Dean was agile. He turned over a pile of rocks and pulled away. He found that although the speed and strength of the large sickle zombie were several times stronger than ordinary zombies, it was still inferior to him. However, its desperate fighting style made it difficult for him to resist. In close combat, he could only be regarded as a rookie. This was also the gap between a new hunter and a veteran hunter. Whoosh! Dean ran at full speed. The large sickle zombie roared and chased after him. The corpses on the road caused great obstacles to it. As Dean thought, although the large sickle zombie was stronger than ordinary zombies, it still had great defects in balance and flexibility like other zombies. Through the ruins and rocks along the way, Dean ran for 200 or 300 meters and finally pulled away. While running, he also paid attention to other smells around here, so as not to be followed by other monsters. At the same time, He was also paying attention to the running posture and habits of the large sickle zombie. It could be said that he was multitasking. When the distance was nearly 70 meters, he quickly took out the bow and arrow, quickly loaded the arrow, and stared at it. Must hit, must hit. Dean's mind was focused to the extreme, staring at it. When the distance was 40 meters, he suddenly let go, and the arrow burst out. Puff! In less than 0.5 seconds, it hit instantly. The large sickle zombie made a retching sound in its throat. The fast-running body seemed to suddenly lose power. Its legs stopped, and the inertia drove the upper body to fall. It rolled 4 or 5 times on the ground, black blood scattered, and stopped moving. Dean breathed a sigh of relief and walked over. He saw that the position where his arrow hit was not its skull, but its eyeball. The arrow directly pierced the eyeball, and the arrow went into half, destroying the skull, and then killed it. Dean adjusted his breathing and listened to the surrounding environment. After he did not feel any movement, he divided part of his mind on the large sickle zombie. He returned to the place where the previous battle took place, picked up the sword that fell on the ground, and 2 boxes of black gunpowder. He carried them to the side of the large sickle zombie and put them down. Then he squatted down and cut off its head with the sword. Along the incision, he repeatedly cut several times before cutting off its cervical vertebrae. I have never seen such a weird sickle zombie, and there is no record in the Monster Atlas. Is it a newly mutated sickle zombie? Dean used the sword along the jaw joint to pry open its head, while thinking, from the strength and speed, it should be about level 12 to 14, comparable to ordinary intermediate hunters. Soon, Dean hollowed out its skull. The brain tissue in the skull was similar to that of ordinary zombies. It was very cold, as if it had been frozen. The color of the brain was black. After smashing it, there was a dark blue cold crystal inside. The color was deeper and purer than the cold crystal in the head of ordinary zombies. Dean grabbed it and looked at it. He put away the cold crystal, turned around and packed up his things. He quickly left here, so as not to attract other things with the smell of blood. Coming to a relatively open ruin, Dean leaned against a moss-covered boulder and took out the dark blue cold crystal. After a moment of hesitation, he cut open his palm and put the cold crystal on it. Soon, the cold crystal gradually melted and turned into mucus that penetrated into the wound. Dean had no feeling in his left hand, but soon he felt a cold flow from his shoulder into his body. The cold first spread to the place where the cold air spread to, along the neck to his brain. This made him a little surprised. Soon, he felt the chill in his brain. Under the stimulation of the cold air, his consciousness became clearer, and his vision became brighter. At the same time, another part of the cold air flowed into his body. It seemed to be compatible with the blood, and was gradually neutralized by the boiling blood. The chill gradually disappeared, and his body was full of strength. It seemed that the physical energy consumed in the battle had been completely restored in an instant. Dean had several experiences in absorbing cold crystals, so he immediately judged that the feeling brought by this dark blue cold crystal was similar to that of ordinary cold crystal, but the effect was more obvious. I didn't expect that after the mutation of the zombie, the quality of the cold crystal would also change. Dean muttered to himself. He wiped the sword and took out the map that he carried with him. He drew the route that he had traveled all the way. Now he was the pioneer of the New World Consortium outside the giant wall, so the work of drawing the map was naturally done by him. Moreover, it would be convenient for him to hunt again in the future. Chapter 2:15. This Walking Dead was on the adjacent street. When Dean quietly sneaked about 500 or 600 meters away from it, he immediately smelled its smell and approached him. He knew that it was aware of him. He was secretly shocked. Such a vigilant reaction was by no means an ordinary Walking Dead. Was it a mutant like just now? However, this time he was prepared. He quickly came to a relatively excellent shooting angle that he had already noticed. He put on a dark silver arrow and stared at a corner of the wasteland in front of him. According to the movement of the smell, he could sense its movement route. It was coming out. Dean opened his eyes and suddenly shot the arrow in his hand. Whoosh! The bow was pulled to the full and the arrow was shot out. He saw a huge figure running out of the corner covered with moss and plant. It had long hands and feet, a hunched back, and sharp fins protruding along the back of the little finger. It was the previous large sickle walking dead. With a puff, the moment it ran out, the arrow shot out and hit its face. As expected, Dean shot at a height according to the height of the previous large sickle walking dead. However, considering the subtle height difference of each walking dead, he aimed at the moderate height of the mouth, but shot the forehead. The overall height of this walking dead was slightly shorter than the previous large sickle walking dead by a few inches. The arrow went into it, and the head and upper body of the large sickle walking dead leaned back. After a moment, it recovered inch by inch and roared toward Dean. However, just after running more than 10 meters, its feet slipped and fell to the ground. Its body rolled a few times and stopped moving. Dean was secretly shocked. He did not expect that his special dark silver arrow did not kill it directly. He shot an ordinary fine iron arrow and focused on its head. Seeing no response, he was relieved. He carefully approached it, pulled out a sharp sword and cut off its head. After several cuts, its cervical vertebra was completely cut off. Dean took back the ordinary fine iron arrow and pulled out the dark silver arrow. He saw that the arrowhead had burst. In the wound of the arrowhead, there was a dark silver luster. This was mercury. In order to enhance the destructive power of the arrowhead, Dean had thought of many methods and finally thought of mercury. In the old era, mercury was highly toxic. If it was involved in the blood vessels, even the medical standards of the old era could not save the life. Mercury was denser than the arrowhead. When the arrowhead was subjected to the impact, the mercury would break the arrowhead and eject out, causing terrible lethality. Dean took out a dagger and quickly pulled out the skull of the walking dead. He saw the mercury penetrate into the skull. Because of the heat absorption of the cold crystal and the temperature of the skull, the mercury gradually cooled down after entering the skull. After cooling, part of the skull was stuck and destroyed, so it killed the walking dead. Dean dug out the cold crystals wrapped in the cranial tissue and stored them temporarily. He was going to accumulate a few more crystals and then go back to the relatively safe area next to the giant wall to absorb them. He didn't want to cut his palms and cause festering wounds. The walking dead outside the giant wall passage really had a mutation. Dean glanced at the huge sickle walking dead. If it was only one, then it was a coincidence, but it was relatively common to encounter two walking dead in a row. The first one he shot was an ordinary walking dead, but it was mostly because it was trapped in the car, so there was no way to eat, so there was no mutation. 10 years ago, Huasheng Consortium's senior hunter team entered here. Most of them didn't sweep around the giant wall, but went deep inside. Like these walking dead, with the character of senior hunters, most of them disdained to hunt. Dean thought. After all, a cold crystal was only worth 1 gold coin. But hunting a more valuable monster, peeling off its materials, could be worth more than a dozen gold coins, or even hundreds of thousands of gold coins. These walking dead are active here, but have not been killed. Either the horrible monsters have left here, or they have no desire to eat these mutated sickle walking dead. The probability of the former is not big. The reason why the monsters will disappear in the area is that they can't find food in the area, so they have to migrate. The second is that there is a more terrible existence in the area. Dean's eyes flashed, and his mind quickly analyzed. If it's the latter, even these sickle-walking corpses with such a strong physique can't raise the desire to hunt, indicating that the demand for food is extremely high, and it also means that their own hunting level is extremely terrifying. Two factors, no matter which one, made his face a little ugly, and his heart became more cautious, not daring to have the slightest carelessness. He thought about it and used his old method. He used the dagger to cut the skin of the mutated sickle walking dead. He cut many pieces of its festered epidermis and stuck them on the surface of his armor. In order to prevent it from slipping, he stuck it in various joints of the armor. The reason why he didn't directly smear its blood on the armor was mainly to consider that some monsters did not hunt these mutated sickle walking dead. Perhaps they had no appetite, but if they were stimulated with blood, they might become hungry. Cutting off the epidermis to take the rotten smell could cover up his own smell. Although there was still a small amount of blood smell under the epidermis, this was inevitable. After doing this, Dean quickly left the place and followed the direction of the smell of the undead. The number of these walking dead was relatively small, and the distribution was extremely sparse, unlike other ordinary walking dead outside the giant wall passage. Soon, Dean came to the smell of a single walking dead. He thought that this time his body was covered by the smell of the mutated sickle walking dead, and it was not easy to be detected. He did not expect to be detected when he was about 700 or 800 meters away. The smell quickly approached here. This made Dean a little surprised. If there was no smell, he could reach at least 500 meters with his own stealth method before he would be detected. He didn't have time to think too much. He quickly pulled out the dark silver arrow, looked around, found a more suitable place to shoot, and quietly stared at the direction of the walking dead's movement. The distance of 200 meters would decide the outcome. Soon, the undead rushed out of a lush vines, with almost no clothes on its body, and a thick layer of dust on its skin. It roared and rushed toward Dean. It was a mutated sickle walking dead. Dean had expected it, and the arrow burst out. Puff! The arrow pierced its face. Dean's face changed slightly. It was useless. The face was a distance from the cranial tissue, and mercury could not destroy the cranial tissue. He quickly put the arrow. This time it was an ordinary arrow, because the mutated sickle walking dead had run within the range of 100 meters. Calm down, focus, calm down. Dean's eyes narrowed and suddenly let go. The arrow burst out, and with a puff, it ran through the walking dead's eye socket. Dean breathed a sigh of relief. When the mutated sickle walking dead rolled to the ground and stopped moving, he approached it and cut off its head. After harvesting the cold crystal, Dean held the firebox and continued to touch the smell of the walking dead in another perception range. Time flew. 2 days passed in a blink of an eye. There was no rain in these 2 days. Although the weather was gloomy, it was a rare good weather for hunting. Dean hunted during the day, but did not dare to run around at night. Although he had night vision, some terrifying hunters and monsters liked to go out at night to eat. Every night, he would find some broken ruins and sprinkle the black gunpowder around. The first reason was to use the smell of the black gunpowder to confuse his own smell. The second reason was that if he really encountered a terrifying monster, he would have a chance to resist. Once outside the giant wall, his life would not be 100% guaranteed. Dean could only seek the greatest possibility of survival in danger. After 2 consecutive days of hunting, he killed 22 mutated sickle walking dead, and almost all the walking dead in the vicinity were swept away. Now, he was considering whether to go deeper. Chapter 216. After much consideration, Dean still had no choice. If he did not move forward, he could only retreat. He could only continue to go deeper into the ruins alone. This time, he took the initiative to quietly explore the nearest place without the smell of the undead. He stopped 3 or 4 kilometers away and unloaded the gunpowder boxes. He took out one of the gunpowder boxes and fixed it in a concave pile of corpses. Then he drew a fuse with the black fire in the other gunpowder box and poured the excess gunpowder on top of the gunpowder box. Then he tidied up the surrounding terrain and arranged a hunting trap. After doing this, Dean quietly touched the place where the smell came from. As the distance got closer, he became more nervous. If this monster was good at speed and had a strong physique, he was worried that he would not have the chance to run to the trap. Although the probability was low, it was still life-threatening. When he was close to a kilometer away, Dean still did not have any big reaction to the smell. He could only get closer again. When the distance was 400 or 500 meters, he suddenly smelled the smell moving toward him at high speed. Dean turned around and ran away. While he was running, he smelled the scent, and the distance between him and himself was not shortened. Only then did he feel a little relieved. When he came to an area with sparse weeds, he looked back and saw a large reptile chasing him. It looked like a lizard, but also like an insect. He had seen this monster in the Monster Atlas. It was a level 12 horned lizard. It was an omnivorous monster. It ate both grass and meat, but preferred grass. Dean looked at its crocodile-like bloody mouth and immediately turned to stop. He quickly put an iron arrow and waited for it to enter the range of 200 meters before shooting. Puff! The iron arrow hit the top of its head, piercing the scales and penetrating a few inches. The horned lizard felt pain and immediately stopped. It turned around and ran toward the place with more weed. Dean immediately caught up and shot an arrow at the same time. However, when the prey was running, he was also running, so it was extremely difficult to shoot. The second arrow suddenly missed. He continued to put the third arrow and kept shooting while chasing. After 400 or 500 meters, suddenly, the horned lizard that was fleeing in panic in front of him suddenly stopped and stood in front of a bush. It seemed to be thinking about where to go. Dean saw it stop, immediately seized this excellent opportunity, quickly knocked an arrow and aimed. However, before he could shoot the arrow, a scene that suddenly appeared caused his expression to change greatly. He saw that in the grass in front of this horned lizard, a bloody mouth suddenly opened wide and bit down on the terrified horned lizard's upper body. The lower half of the horned lizard hurriedly struggled and twisted, its tail incessantly swaying, but the bloody mouth slowly lifted up, letting the lizard's body slide into its throat. At the same time, it swayed left and right, and very quickly, the lizard's body completely fell into its mouth. Blood sputtered out from the corner of its mouth, dripping onto the grass half a meter tall below. Dudian saw it clearly. It was a snake-tail magic crocodile, a level 19 hunter. Even a senior hunter would need to be careful in order to kill it. Run? Of course he had to run. But before running, Dean only hesitated for a moment. He plucked up his courage and quickly pulled out a mercury arrow from the quiver. He aimed at its chewing mouth and shot it. The arrow streaked across the sky and pierced into its mouth. The snake-tail magic crocodile roared in pain, and its bloody eyes stared at Dean in the distance. It was full of anger at the little guy who disturbed its meal. It swallowed the horned lizard that had been chewed into pieces and ran toward Dean. Dean's face changed slightly, and he hurriedly turned and ran. Boom! 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 The ground shook violently, and heavy footsteps were approaching from behind. Dean's face was ugly, and he ran wildly. Soon he came to a pile of rocks and weed. His figure nimbly jumped over the rocks and ran. He estimated the position of the trap in his mind. There were still about 1,500 meters left, but the footsteps behind him had caught up with him to the point where he was hundreds of meters away. Dean's whole body was covered in cold sweat. He roared and ran with all his strength. He only felt that his legs were flying, and the wind whistled in his ears like thunder. Not enough. Not fast enough. Dean was frightened. He had already heard the vibration behind him. It was 40 to 50 meters away from him, and it could completely catch up with him before the trap. Faster! Faster! Dean shouted in his heart. His whole body seemed to be burning, and he desperately ran. Gradually, he heard heavy footsteps behind him, but he didn't dare to look back. When he finally reached the trap, his tense heart relaxed a little. The footsteps he heard were also hundreds of meters away. He quickly took out the matchstick in the inner layer of his armor and looked back. He saw the body of the snake-tailed demon crocodile more than 400 meters away. It was still chasing, but it was running slower and slower. Dean was slightly startled, and his eyes suddenly lit up. Was the mercury working? He immediately put the match in his mouth, quickly pulled out a mercury arrow, and aimed. He stared at the snake-tail magic crocodile swaying as it ran. At the same time, the snake tail behind it swayed from side to side, making it faster and more balanced on land. Dean's eyes were sharp and cold, like a dark archer hiding in the shadows. When the snake-tail magic crocodile stepped into the range of 200 meters, his eyes flashed with a cold light, and the arrow was gently released. With a whistling sound, the arrow shot out. When the snake-tail magic crocodile was about 190 meters away, the arrow slammed into its eyeball. Roar! The snake-tail magic crocodile's body suddenly fell down, and it howled in pain. The crocodile itself had no vocal organs, but during the process of mutation, it had grown one. At this moment, it let out a low, hoarse roar like a tiger. Dean's eyes were cold, and he mercilessly continued to put the third arrow. This time, it was a fine iron arrow. After all, the mercury arrow production was limited, and it couldn't be recovered after shooting. During the period when it fell, Dean shot 6 arrows in a row, and all of them hit the target. The snake-tail magic crocodile was lying on the ground, screaming incessantly. After a moment, it gradually stopped moving. Blood seeped out from the wounds on its body, dyeing the grass within a few meters red. Especially on its head, there were 6 or 7 arrows inserted, which made people's scalp tingle. Dean waited for a moment, and seeing that it still didn't move, he cautiously approached it. After a distance of 40 to 50 meters, he grabbed a stone and threw it at the crocodile. The snake-tail magic crocodile, which originally seemed to be dead, was hit by the stone. It roared fiercely and opened its mouth to bite forward, but it bit empty air. This bite seemed to have exhausted its strength. After biting empty air, its head heavily hit the ground, and it stopped moving again. Dean's heart was both glad and relieved. Although this monster was cunning, after all, it was difficult to defeat a human. If it was replaced by another hunter, they would definitely have waited until he was close to them. Just like the bloody swordsman Linda, who could still endure the pain when her beautiful cheeks were burned by the flame, in order to give him a fatal blow. This kind of endurance probably only a human could do. Chapter 217. He continued to test it a few times until he confirmed that it was completely unresponsive. Dean cautiously approached it, waved his sword and stabbed it in the eye. Puff! The sword pierced through the hard cuticle eyelid and went into the eye socket. Blood oozed out. The snake-tail monster still had no response. It was completely dead. I didn't expect that I would be able to kill a level 19 monster. Dean felt a little tired, but his heart was full of excitement and heat. Even some experienced veteran hunters may not be able to kill a level 19 monster alone. This was the level that senior hunters could touch, but it died in his hands. It's all thanks to the mercury arrow. There was a smile on Dean's face. Humans ruled the planet by relying on their brains, not brute force with these beasts. Wisdom was always the sharpest and most terrible weapon of humans. He rested for a moment, then bravely stepped forward. He pulled out the dagger and cut along the gap of its mouth. His technique was slightly rusty, so the speed of dissection was relatively slow. But as he continued to cut, he gradually mastered the texture of the cuticle, and the cutting speed increased significantly. After a moment, Dean used the sword to cut along the belly of the crocodile. The tip of the sword pierced through its stomach. The stinky gastric juice suddenly poured out, along with some undigested bones and flesh. It was full of rotten stench. In addition, the limbs of the horned lizard that had been chewed into several pieces also rushed out along with the gastric juice. The claws that were stained with gastric juice fell to the ground. Dean endured the pungent stench and completely cut it open. He collected the hardest scales on its back and wiped the blood on the weed. He folded them and put them into his bag. Then there were a few claws which were excellent materials for making weapons. They could even be made into arrows. The claws were extremely hard and were natural arrowhead. As for the horned lizard that was chewed up by the crocodile, Dean did not collect it. Although he could still collect some valuable parts and sell them to the dark churches, life, faction alchemists or potions, but the cost-effectiveness was too low. His bag space was limited, so he could only pick the precious ones first. It is difficult to make money inside the giant wall. A gold coin can make people bow down. Outside the giant wall there is money everywhere, but they are too lazy to pick it up. Unfortunately, they can lose their life at any time. Dean carried the luggage on his back and looked at the huge body of the snake-tail magic crocodile on the ground. He sighed and shook his head. He retrieved the iron arrows from the crocodile's head. He saw that the tips of these arrows were somewhat blunt. They could only be used to kill monsters below level 8. When the arrows are used up and the materials are filled, we'll return. Dean made up his mind. Since he had rented this passage, he could come and go at any time. Unlike the hunters of other consortia, they were extremely reluctant to come outside the giant wall. They were often called by consortia to go out for missions, but he was working for himself. Naturally, he had to work hard. Just as he was about to move forward, suddenly Dean frowned slightly. He smelled the smell of the undead around him. There were 3 other odors mixed with the smell of the undead. It should be other types of monsters. Dean's face changed slightly. He immediately knew that the bloody smell of his dissection of the snake-tail magic crocodile had attracted these monsters. They are so sensitive to the smell of blood. They are several times more sensitive than ordinary undead. The other 3 odors are far away from here, but they were also attracted here. Their physique should not be lower than the mutated sickle undead. Dean's eyes flashed quickly. He felt their smell approaching quickly. He looked back at the black powder not far away. With this box of explosives alone, he could kill at most 2 or 3 mutated sickle undead. Moreover, he needed them to be very close. If he encountered a terrible monster like the snake-tail magic crocodile, it was estimated that he could seriously injure it. After a moment of thinking, Dean immediately put away his bow and sword and threw the bag into the nearby grass. The smell of blood on the skin of the crocodile would expose him. After wiping the blood on the sword with the grass, Dean quickly turned and left. A few minutes after Dean left, the surrounding grass rustled. 4 mutated sickle undead with long hands and feet pushed the grass and ran one after another. The first undead saw the back of the snake-tail magic crocodile with a skinned back on the ground. The strong smell of blood stimulated its brain. It roared excitedly and rushed up, biting the flesh of the skin with its sharp teeth. While biting, 3 mutated sickle undead rushed up one after another. However, when several mutated sickle undead approached, they did not come forward to share the food together. Instead, they looked at each other, roared and rushed to each other. Dean, who was lying on a moss-covered crashed plain in the distance, saw this scene from a distance, and could not help but be stunned. The next moment, he saw the 4 mutated sickle undead madly attacking each other, waving their arms and biting as if they were enemies. Soon, a mutated sickle undead was beheaded by the sickle in another hand. When it just picked up the severed head and was ready to bite, another mutated sickle undead crossed its arm and cut off its head. After a while, the battle between the 4 mutated sickle undead came to an end. Only the last mutated sickle undead survived. It held the 3 heads on the ground and kept gnawing. The skin on the face, the nose, the eyeballs, the ears, and other parts were all eaten. Then it opened the skull and took out the cranial tissue and ate it. The black blood oozed from the black tissue stained its mouth, and even the cold crystal in the cranial tissue was swallowed. Dean was shocked. How could these mutated sickle zombies kill each other? No wonder when he smeared the breath of the mutated sickle undead, it was noticed by the mutated sickle undead faster. It turned out that they were each other's prey, eating each other. Dean's face was ugly. Suddenly, he thought that the number of mutated sickle undead here was so small, and the distribution was so sparse. Was it because they hunted each other? Compared with the body of the snake-tail crocodile on the ground, did these mutated sickle undead prefer to eat the same kind? When he was in doubt, suddenly a low roar sounded. He saw that the walking dead that ate the 3 heads of the mutated sickle walking dead roared to the sky. At the same time, the teeth in its mouth grew a few inches like bamboo shoots and became sharper. Such rapid bone growth was incredible. In addition to the fingers, the bone scythes and sharp nails on its arms were slightly increased. Chapter 218. Whoosh, whoosh. When the mutated sickle zombie ate 3 of its kind, the other 3 zombies caught up one after another. The surrounding grass rustled, and suddenly a black giant rat the size of a small suckling pig jumped out. Its hair was sharp like a hedgehog. The sharp black rat head was full of dark red eyes, flashing bloodthirsty luster, and rushed to the mutated sickle zombie that had just evolved. Roar! The mutated sickle zombie noticed the black giant rat, roared and raised its hand to grab it. It immediately grabbed it and bit the head of the black giant rat. The latter screamed in pain and struggled fiercely, but it could not resist the sharp teeth biting off inch by inch. Blood spurted from its head, and soon it stopped moving. It's a multi-eyed rat. Dean was secretly shocked. It's a level 8 hunter. According to the Monster Atlas, there is a small chance that an adult blood-sucking rat can mutate into a dazzling rat. Under the corrosion of viruses and radiation, monsters would mutate at any time while their cells adapted. Once they mutated and gave birth, they would be a brand new monster, inheriting part of the habits of the monsters before they mutated, as well as new powers and preferences. For example, the ordinary blood-sucking rat was extremely sensitive to the smell of blood, but it did not have night vision. The multi-eyed rat not only had night vision, but also had dynamic vision. It could be said that it was the nemesis of hunters. It was described in the Monster Atlas that even senior hunters had less than 10% chance to shoot a prepared multi-eyed rat. It could be seen that the vision of the multi-eyed rat was strong. Most of the mutated sickle zombies here, but the multi-eyed rat did not regard them as natural enemies and avoid them. Is there something more specific to the multi-eyed rat here? Dean's eyes revealed a thoughtful look. In the 3 years of prison life, he had learned to find information from the ordinary details. Most people may be immersed in the bloody picture in front of them, but he couldn't help but think of many things. There was not much difference between monsters and beasts. One was a species bred on the earth, and the other was a new type of beast produced by the processing of viruses and radiation. It was more terrible and stronger than the original, but it still had regional characteristics, hunting habits, natural enemies, and so on. According to the Monster Atlas, the natural enemy of the multi-eyed rat is the lava snake. Its scales are like rocks, colorless and odorless. Like the crocodile, it is good at wading and hunting. The scales on its tail can open and close, exuding a bloody smell to lure prey. It is one of the most terrible stealthy monsters. The adult lava snake's hunting level is about 24 to 25. Dean's eyes flashed. Multi-eyed rat would not appear in the lava snake's territory, which meant that the probability of the lava snake lurking nearby was not high. At this time, the mutated sickle walking dead had bitten the body of the multi-eyed magic rat. Its sharp claws tore its skin and held its head tightly. Its throat was rolling as if it was drinking blood. Dean was startled. Could it be that the mutated sickle zombies really had the ability to digest? This was absolutely impossible for ordinary Walking Dead. It should be known that ordinary Walking Dead could still move even if their bellies were torn and their internal organs fell. Although the body of this mutated sickle Walking Dead was relatively well preserved and there was no damage, all the mutated sickle Walking Dead were also evolved from ordinary Walking Dead. If the Walking Dead was like a puppet without life and soul, then the Walking Dead that could absorb and digest was like a living creature. At this time, there was a vibration in the distance. It turned out to be a nearly 3-meter-high hound monster rushing over. Its body was huge. Between the two forelimbs at the lower end of the neck, there was a mouth full of sharp teeth. Dean was startled. He had never seen this monster in the Monster Atlas. But the atlas he had seen was the version 3 years ago. This monster atlas would be released from the inner wall every month. If there was a new monster, it would be released in advance. Behind this monster, there was another giant python with black and gold patterns all over its body. It was about 7 or 8 meters long, and it quickly swam over. The faintest smell that Dean smelled was emitted from this giant python. Roar! The mutated sickle zombies rushed toward the 3-meter-high hound monster, and the giant python monster behind also rushed over. One rushed in front, the sickle on its arm crazily slashed, and the other wrapped around the tail behind. The largest hound monster roared angrily and bit the mutated sickle zombies in front of it. The mutated sickle zombies did not let it bite, but sidestepped and continued to rush. Dean's heart set off a storm as he saw this. Escape? It knew how to dodge. Could it be that it had consciousness? Dean suddenly thought of the first mutated sickle zombies he shot before. At that time, the arrow hit its face bone, but it raised its hand and pulled it out. If it was an ordinary zombie, it would not feel the pain at all, nor would it have the consciousness to pull it out. Zombies can actually evolve consciousness. Dean's body trembled slightly, and his heart was filled with great fear. No one understood what a terrible disaster this was. After a while, the hound monster finally fell. The mutated sickle zombies attacked it head-on, and it was seriously injured. One of its arms was bitten off, while the giant python monster was not injured, but it played a big role in the battle. After killing the hound monster, the giant python monster roared and rushed to the mutated sickle zombies. Its big mouth suddenly bit one of its arms, and its fangs penetrated, and venom was injected into it. The mutated sickle zombies roared and raised its broken arm, using the broken bones to poke the giant python monster. However, the giant python demonic creature's body quickly wrapped around it, strangling its body and quickly gaining the upper hand. Dean put away the shock in his heart, and a glimmer of light flashed in his eyes. This was a great opportunity. He immediately sneaked over. When he was close to the range of 200 meters, he bent down and stood in a bush, pulled out a mercury arrow and aimed. After a few seconds, he grasped a predictive moment and released the arrow. Whoosh! The arrow shot out and hit a few inches below the neck of the giant python. The purpose was not to kill it on the spot, but to seriously injure it. Otherwise, without its restraint, the mutated sickle zombies would soon pounce on him. Dean had already put the second arrow, this time aiming at the head of the mutated sickle zombies. Puff! The arrow quickly hit its target, shooting at the torn lip muscle in the corner of its mouth and penetrating into its mouth. The mutated sickle zombies lost its balance under the force of the arrow and fell down. After the pain of the arrow, the giant python tightened its entanglement. Dean put the third arrow, ready to harvest the giant python, and then deal with the mutated sickle zombies, whose combat power had been weakened by half. However, a sudden roar interrupted his fantasy plan. He saw the mutated sickle zombies fell down with a loud roar. It suddenly lowered its head and bit the head of the giant python monster. The sharp teeth pierced the scales on the head of the giant python monster. The giant python monster twisted its body in pain and tightened its entanglement, but the snake mouth spat out the arm of the mutated sickle zombies. It struggled and shook its head, trying to break away from the mouth. But when it released its mouth, the arm of the mutated sickle zombies quickly hugged its head and bit harder. The body of the giant python monster twisted wildly, driving the body of the mutated sickle zombies to roll on the ground. However, it was unknown whether the effect of mercury or the effect of the bite of the mutated sickle zombies, but the struggle of the giant python monster quickly weakened. After a while, it gradually stopped twisting, and the snake body wrapped around the mutated sickle zombies loosened softly. The mutated sickle zombies still lowered its head and bit. Dean's face changed, and he hurriedly aimed and shot an arrow. Puff! The mercury arrow hit the face of the mutated sickle zombies, but it did not hit the eyes. Although it could hit the target at a range of 200 meters, the probability of hitting a small eyeball was still a little low. The arrow in the face made the mutated sickle zombies raise its head suddenly, and its scarlet eyes quickly locked on Dean in the distance. It suddenly made an angry roar. On its forehead there was a small and sharp bump, piercing the skin and protruding to the outside of the forehead. The length was about half a finger. It was actually a very small bone horn. Dean's face changed. He did not expect that the mutated sickle zombies would mutate again, and its body shape had also changed, becoming a kind of zombies he had never seen before. He hurriedly aimed and shot the third arrow quickly. The horn on the forehead of the horned sickle zombies had just grown out, and the arrow pierced into its throat. Half of the arrow went in and cut off its voice. Chapter 219. Whoosh! The arrow was shot out. The horned sickle zombie suddenly tilted its neck, and the arrow brushed past its cheek by a few centimeters. It scratched some flesh and shot into the grass behind. Dean's pupil shrank and he quickly shot the fifth arrow. The horned sickle zombie climbed up from the ground, but it was slow to dodge. The arrow hit its chest, and the strong force drove its body backward. Then it stabilized and pulled out the arrow backhandedly. Its scarlet eyes stared at Dean coldly, like a snake staring at a frog. It ran quickly. So fast. Dean's face changed slightly. This speed was more than half of the previous one. He quickly put the sixth arrow. When it rushed into the range of 100 meters, his eyes firmly locked on its head, and the arrow was shot out. Whoosh! The arrow was as fast as a meteor, and it hit the corner of its eye, sinking a few inches. Dudian shot an arrow, didn't look at the result, hurriedly turned and ran. The horned sickle zombie roared and raised its hand to pull out the arrow from the corner of its eye. He saw that the arrowhead had burst, and there was dark silver flowing in the wound. It was the hot mercury that gushed out from the arrowhead. After running at full speed for hundreds of meters, Dean hurriedly glanced back and saw that the horned sickle zombie had been pulled away by him for hundreds of meters. He immediately grabbed the bow and arrow, put the arrow backhandedly, and aimed and released his fingers at the moment of turning around. The arrow was suddenly shot out. Although it was shot in a hurry, it did not miss. The ultra-high accuracy that he had practiced for a long time made it almost impossible to miss within the range of 100 meters. This time, it still failed to hit the eyeball, but it hit the previously injured eye socket. The horned sickle zombie screamed and pulled out the arrow. Its body twisted and ran quickly. Dean did not give it a chance to get close, and continued to run forward. After being hit several times in a row, the speed of the horned sickle zombie was getting slower and slower. Dean once again pulled away to the best shooting distance, added another arrow, and then continued to slip away. After a few minutes, the horned sickle zombie finally fell under Dean's arrow. An arrow pierced its eyeball, and it fell to the ground, no longer moving. Seeing this, Dean was also relieved. He only felt that his whole body was soaked in cold sweat. Fortunately, he had prepared mercury arrows. If he only relied on ordinary iron arrows, he would most likely die here today. There are 12 mercury arrows left. Dudyan counted the arrows in the quiver. Only 8 arrows were consumed, so he could continue to hunt. He came to 100 meters away from the horned sickle zombie, pulled out a fine iron arrow, and shot it. Seeing that it still did not respond, he was a little relieved. He pulled out a sharp sword and carefully approached it, waving the sword to cut its neck. With a click, the sword was stuck. Dean struggled to pull it out and cut off its head with several consecutive slashes. This time, Dean did not hurry to empty its head, but cut along its neck inch by inch, looking at its body structure. He saw that the Adam's apple in the neck was relatively complete, and under the skin on both sides of the Adam's apple were a few finger-thick black blood vessels. When he dissected ordinary zombies, he did not see such thick blood vessels in the neck. He picked up the severed head next to him and looked at it. At the lower end of the fracture, he found a few black blood vessels. He dug up along the blood vessels and was surprised to find that the blood vessels were connected to the back of its fangs. There were tiny holes on these fangs, and the inside was empty. Blood-sucking fangs? Dean saw the fangs and could not help but recall the appearance when it bit the multi-eyed mouse. At that time, its throat rolled, and it seemed that it sucked the mouse's blood through the fangs. Dean used the sword to cut its stomach. A strong rancid smell came out from inside. He saw that the organs inside the abdomen were frozen, exuding cold air. The stomach was cut, but there was no gastric juice inside. Instead, there was a mass of stinky black mucus. It was like something had been repeatedly digested to the last residue. Dean's face was a little ugly as he smelled the pungent smell. He held his head a few meters away and glanced at the protruding horns on its head. They were sharp, like the horns on the forehead of a rhinoceros. Dean used the dagger to cut along the small corner and dug out a ring-shaped groove. He saw that the bottom of the small horn was connected to its skull, and it was directly grown from the skull. He did not know what it meant in the field of biology, nor could he imagine what kind of changes such a thing would cause to the brain in the field of medicine. But he faintly felt that if this horned sickle zombie was allowed to continue to mutate, it might become an extremely terrifying existence. After pondering for a while, Dean withdrew his thoughts and took out its intracranial tissue from its neck. In this black intracranial brain tissue, there was a dark blue cold crystal. The color was extremely pure, like a crystal. Dean picked it up and looked at it. The purity and color of this cold crystal were purer and cleaner than any he had seen before. He immediately carefully put it into the inner armor, and then pulled out the other fine iron arrows from its head. The sharp arrowheads had been blunt, which showed how hard its skull was. Putting away the arrows and carrying the bow, Dean picked up the bag that was thrown next to the corpse of the snake-tailed crocodile. He returned to the gunpowder box and was ready to leave. Suddenly, he smelled a very faint and obscure smell. It was quietly approaching here, and it appeared within a few hundred meters of him. His pupils shrank slightly, his fingers clenched the bow, and his body did not dare to make too big movements. He could not determine what kind of existence this thing that had quietly sneaked in during the battle was. His eyes quickly swept around, and he saw a piece of weeds that had been disturbed by the previous battle. The smell was so faint that he could not distinguish which direction it came from. His heart was pounding, the blood in his body was speeding up, and his muscles were extremely tight. It was definitely not an ordinary monster that could quietly sneak in such a close distance. Rustle! The sound of the breeze rustling the grass was heard. Dean was shocked and suddenly looked back. He saw that the grass behind him was slowly pushed away, and a humanoid monster that was only half a meter tall, like a human child, walked out of the grass. Its whole body was covered with black scales, and its hands and feet were sharp claws. Its body was extremely thin, and it did not make the slightest sound when it walked. Its face had human facial features, no eyebrows, and its eyes were dark red. There was no ferociousness in its eyes, no killing intent, but deep tranquility. It just looked up at Dean, and then its eyes found the corpse of the sickle-horned undead on the ground. Whoosh! Its figure suddenly flashed, as if it had teleported, and appeared in front of the corpse of the sickle-horned undead. It lay on it, and its mouth, which was like a normal human child, suddenly opened to an incredible extent, revealing finger-long fangs. It nailed the flesh on the chest of the sickle-horned undead, and pulled it down, scraping a layer of flesh into its mouth, and chewing it. When Dean saw this small black figure, his face suddenly changed. Cannibal! Chapter 220. From the name, it could be seen that this was a named monster. Among the many named monsters, the corpse eater was not considered rare. Even so, the probability of encountering a named monster during a hunt was extremely low. As for encountering a rare named monster like the Defiler, it was even more of a fortuitous encounter. Many hunters who hunted for 3 to 5 years might not even encounter a named monster. From this, it could be seen how precious it was. However, Dean was not excited at the moment. Instead, he was cold from head to toe. His whole body was shivering. Judging from the appearance of the corpse eater, and the speed of its movement, it should be close to the adult stage, with a hunting level of 23. Run. Dean thought so in his heart, but he could not move his feet. He knew that once he made a move, he would alarm the corpse eater who was eating. With the speed it just showed, he could not run away. However, if he continued to stand here and wait for it to eat, it would still rush over. What to do? Dean's forehead was full of cold sweat. He tried to control his emotions and calm himself down. His mind was spinning fast, thinking about the information he had seen about the corpse eater. Likes: hunting zombies. Regional habits: mostly in dry places, rarely seen in swamps and other wet places. Weaknesses: eyes, abdomen. Special reminder: corpse eater is afraid of light and fire. If you ignite a flame, there is a greater chance of dispersing it. The record on the Monster Atlas was extremely brief. After all, it was a named monster. Some were hunted, but very few were caught alive. The things that could be studied were very limited. Fire. Dean thought of the match on his body. His body was tense and extremely nervous. He raised his hand little by little to touch the inside of the armor, but his eyes were fixed on the corpse eater so as not to alarm it. The corpse eater seemed to be extremely hungry. It was lying on the body of the horned sickle and buried its head in eating. It ignored Dean. Dean did not dare to be careless. His fingers touched the inner armor and took out the matchbox with his fingers. The whole movement seemed to be as long as time stood still, making him feel extremely tired. But he knew that this was just the beginning. He held the match and secretly glanced at the black gunpowder fuse on the ground, thinking about the probability of hitting the target after the match was ignited. It's too far away from the explosives. Even if it's detonated, it won't be able to hurt it. If I ignite the surrounding weeds, it will take a certain amount of time for the fire to spread. Moreover, most of the grass here contains water. It will be difficult to ignite it with a small match. It's difficult to disperse the fire. Explosives too far. I can't win a head-on battle. I can't outrun him. After racking his brains, Dean came to a conclusion, but it made his hope more uncertain, which inevitably made him a little anxious. But the past many desperate battles made him retain the last trace of reason. At this moment, he saw that the chest of the horned sickle zombie had been eaten by the ghoul, leaving only some organs in the ribs, which were grabbed and stuffed into its mouth. He knew that there was not much time left for him. Fight. He clenched his teeth and made up his mind. He quickly opened the box of matches and ignited them. He shot them at the fuse of the black fire. In order to prevent the match from going astray, he continuously shot 3 to 4 matches. Only one of them went astray. The rest all fell on the fuse of the black fire. His action also attracted the attention of the ghoul, who was eating. Its face, covered with black scales, was stained with sticky black blood, and its childlike facial features revealed a bit of ferociousness. This was a kind of ferociousness that could not be seen in the slightest human expression. Whoosh! Its figure suddenly leaped over like a black monkey, as fast as lightning. When Dean ejected the match, he had already turned around and ran without looking back. However, even if he moved first, the distance between them was more than 10 meters, and the moment the ghoul moved, it rapidly shortened. Whoosh! As Dean ran quickly, he suddenly turned around and threw the dagger in his hand, shooting it like a javelin at the chasing ghoul. The corpse eater was chasing with all its might and did not expect its prey to suddenly throw something back at it. It was too late to dodge, and its shoulder collided with the dagger. A metallic clang sounded, and the sharp dagger, which flew out at high speed, was not able to pierce through its scales. Instead, it was knocked away by the corpse eater and fell to the ground. The ghoul was not injured, but as if it was provoked, it let out an angry roar and suddenly jumped over. Go! Dean threw another backhand, but it was the sword at his waist. The length of this sword was much larger than the dagger, and it was thrown out and spun toward the ghoul. The ghoul happened to jump in the air. Seeing the sword sweeping over, it angrily raised its claws. The claws, covered with scales, slapped the blade and knocked it down. The ghoul originally wanted to jump to Dean's body, but it was slightly slowed by the resistance of the sword. At this moment of respite, Dean had already run out of the range of its attack. The ghoul fell to the ground and jumped again. The elasticity of its legs was extremely amazing. Dean saw it from the corner of his eyes, and his face was aghast. His feet slammed on the ground, and his body rolled to the side. The ghoul's attack suddenly failed. It growled and quickly rushed toward Dean, who was rolling on the ground. Dean had just climbed up when he saw the ghoul rushing toward him. His face was ugly, but he did not continue to escape. With this distance of 2 or 3 meters, he would be caught by it as soon as he turned around, and it would be more dangerous to give his back to it. He took a deep breath. The short distance was wiped out in an instant. The ghoul jumped like a dexterous black monkey and rushed toward Dean's face. Dean's pupils suddenly widened, and he roared and raised his hand to grab it. At the moment when the ghoul jumped, his palm suddenly stretched out and grabbed one of its arms. At the same time, he roared and rotated his body, using the force of the ghoul's jump to throw it backward. This speed was so fast that the ghoul was caught off guard and was suddenly thrown out by Dean. With a bang, it fell to the ground. It rolled like a ball and quickly climbed up. There was no injury on its body, but its childlike facial features showed an extremely angry and ferocious expression. Its originally normal human mouth suddenly opened wide, and the muscles of its lips seemed to have extremely high elasticity, revealing a mouth full of sharp teeth like steel nails. Roar! It let out a low howl, and just as it was about to run over, a huge force suddenly pushed its body, and the rapidly expanding flames engulfed its body. Boom! A violent explosion sounded on the ground. The place where the ghoul was thrown was the place where the gunpowder box was. Although separated by 7 or 8 meters, Dean's ears were still slightly ringing from the violent explosion. The burning heat hit his face, and at the same time, a large number of dust particles were ejected to his face, and the air was filled with the smell of gunpowder smoke. Dean's chest violently fluctuated. If he had not thrown it away, and it had caught his body, he could only run to the explosives box and perish together with it. Dust particles pattered down from the air. Black smoke drifted. Dean did not have time to breathe a sigh of relief. Suddenly, a sharp black shadow jumped out and hit his body. The surging force suddenly pushed his body backward, and the armor on his chest was tightly stuck by a heavy object. Dean's back hit the grass heavily, but he didn't feel it. His pupils contracted tightly, looking at the ghoul on his chest. His heart was filled with panic. Although he was worried, he didn't expect that the box of explosives not only didn't kill it, but also didn't seriously injure it. The ghoul growled, and its flabby lips grew wide, revealing the neat crisscrossed sharp teeth inside, and bit down on Dean's face. At the moment of the pressure of death, Dean's heart broke out a crazy idea. He roared and raised his fist, smashing it at the ghoul's head. Bang! A violent impact sounded, followed by a subtle sound of bones breaking. The ghoul, who was about to bite him, suddenly rolled to the side, and rolled to the ground 4 or 5 meters away. Dean's eyes were bloodshot. He turned over and climbed up, looking at the ghoul. He saw that it had fallen to the side of the ground, and was slowly climbing up, but its movement was a bit shaky, as if it was drunk, shaking its head. Seeing its state, Dean roared and rushed over. His only thought was to kill it. Only by killing it could he live. He rushed to the front of the ghoul in a few strides and kicked its head, kicking its body that had just climbed up to the ground again. He quickly grabbed one of its sharp claws and lifted its body. Although it looked like a child, it weighed about 100 or 200 pounds. He threw it to the ground heavily. He raised his foot to step on its head, stretched out his other hand, and wanted to use both hands to grab its sharp claws at the same time and tear off its claws. But as soon as he raised his other hand, his scalp went numb. He saw that the other hand was his left hand, which he could not feel. At this moment it was broken from the fist, and the bones at the wrist were cracked, piercing through the palm, and blood kept flowing. Dean suddenly sobered up, and understood why he was able to punch the ghoul before. He could not feel the strength of his left hand, and it was completely waived by his own thoughts. The power that burst out just now was far beyond the limit of his left hand, so much so that his left hand was almost crippled. While Dean was shocked, he felt that the ghoul under his feet was resisting and trying to climb up. He hurriedly raised his foot and stepped on its head, using all his strength to trample it. Bang, bang, bang! Chapter 221. Roar! The corpse-eater roared, and its body burst out an amazing force. It broke free from Dean's feet, rolled on the ground and crawled a few meters away. Then it crawled on the ground like a toad. Its dark red eyes stared at Dean. There was not the slightest human emotion in its eyes. Instead, it was the coldness of prey looking at food, and a kind of beast-like anger. It suddenly jumped up and rushed toward Dean. Dean's face changed. There was no way back. Fight! He clenched his fist and roared as he punched. Bang! His left hand swung out and hit the corpse-eater's face. Blood splashed out, but it was not the corpse-eater's. It was Dean's own blood. At the same time, the sound of bones breaking came from his left hand. After being hit by this punch, the corpse-eater howled and fell to the ground, but it immediately climbed back up. Dean pulled out another dagger and fiercely stabbed it in the back of its head. Puff! The dagger pierced the scales and penetrated the corpse-eater's cervical vertebra. Ow! The corpse-eater screamed and waved its claws, trying to force Dean away. Dean saw that he had stabbed the corpse-eater, but he didn't care about the attack. He put all his weight and strength into his right hand and stabbed the dagger deeper. Puff! The dagger flew out as if it had stabbed the air. Dean immediately knew that the dagger had penetrated the corpse-eater's throat. He was pleasantly surprised and hurriedly pressed the direction of the dagger's edge. Ow! The corpse-eater screamed in pain. Its body twitched and rolled violently. Dean clenched his teeth and pressed hard. He roared in his heart. Puff! The dagger's edge slashed horizontally. More than half of the corpse-eater's neck was cut open. Blood suddenly gushed out from the wound. The corpse-eater was not an undead, but a creature like a monster. It had a digestive system and consciousness. The throat was naturally one of its fatal points. Half of its throat was cut open. The pain made the ghoul crazy. Its sharp claws swept towards Dean's leg. It tore the armor made by the Temple of Elements and scratched Dean's leg. Dean's leg was scratched by the sharp claws. Dean gritted his teeth, let go of the dagger, grabbed its back leg, lifted its whole body and fiercely swung it. When its hind legs were pulled up, the corpse-eater's body was also hung upside down. As it swung, blood immediately gushed out from its throat, which was only connected to half of its skin and scales. It was like a large bowl of water being poured out, filling up the muddy puddles on the ground from the battle. The nearby weeds were also dyed red. Very soon, the strength of the corpse-eater's struggle weakened, and its head hung limply on its neck, as if it would fall off at any moment. Dean dragged its body and repeatedly smashed it on the ground. After a few minutes, he felt that it did not struggle or respond at all. Moreover, the blood that was thrown out from its broken neck was in a dot shape instead of the previous splashes of ink. He gradually stopped. He saw that its body did not move, its mouth did not moan, and its claws did not move. Dean's tense body relaxed. He immediately felt that his right hand was extremely sore, and his whole body was sweating. There were also claw marks on his leg. He took a deep breath, picked up the dagger, stepped on its head, and cut it inch by inch until its head was completely cut off. Only then did he feel relieved. He threw away the dagger, sat on the ground, and gasped for breath. After a few breaths, Dean saw the blood all over the ground and immediately raised his vigilance. He immediately supported his tired body, gritted his teeth, and climbed up. He found the 2 daggers and the sword on the ground, as well as his bow, quiver, and bag. Then he searched around the nearby blood puddles on the ground. When he did not see the parasitic soul worm that was thrown out with the blood, he clamped the corpse-eater's head, dragged its body, and left along the direction of the giant wall. After 7 or 8 miles away from the place where the previous battle took place, Dean finally could not hold on anymore. He found a moss-covered stone and sat down, leaning against the stone to rest. At the same time, he untied his bag, opened his food backpack, and took out some dry food and water to eat. Only then did he feel a little more physical strength, and then he continued to sit down and rest. While resting, Dean's eyes fell on the corpse of the corpse-eater. There was still a bit of dreamlike feeling in his heart. A moment ago he was wandering in despair in front of the gates of hell, but the next moment he escaped and even killed this monster. A level 23 existence was actually killed by me. Dean's heart was like a dream. Even an experienced senior hunter may not be able to kill this corpse-eater alone. Only a top senior hunter like Glenn had absolute certainty to kill this corpse-eater. But if he encountered a level 26 Black Weaver, it would be extremely dangerous. After a moment, Dean suddenly thought of his left hand. He could not help but look at it, and his face suddenly became ugly. He saw that his left hand was broken into a horrible sight. The bones in his arm were cracked, and there were bone spurs stained with blood poking out of the flesh of his arm. This was not a minor fracture, but a comminuted fracture. Such a price! Dean's mouth slightly twitched. His scalp was numb, as if a static electricity had passed through it. He did not have time to check the parasitic soul worm in the corpse-eater's body. He took out gauze from the first aid kit and pressed the bone back into the flesh of his left hand. While pinching his arm, he felt that there were fragments of bone in the flesh, which made his face more and more ugly. When the surface of his left hand looked similar to a normal arm, he bit one end of the gauze and quickly wrapped it around his left hand. At this time, the loss of the sense of touch in his left hand helped him. At least he did not need to inject anesthetic, otherwise this severe pain would have made him faint. I'll tie it for the time being, and wait until I go back to see if it can be treated. Dean slightly gritted his teeth. Although compared to saving his life, paying an arm was nothing. Witch Hunter did not have some injuries. But when he thought that he would be a one-armed disabled person in the future, it was still difficult to restrain the anger in his heart. If he could exchange it, even if it was 10 corpse eater, he would be willing. However, thinking about it was just thinking about it. At this point, he only hoped that the medical technology inside the giant wall could cure his arm, and also hoped that his arm was not as serious as it seemed. After resting for a while on the stone, Dean recovered some strength. He glanced at the head of the corpse eater at his feet, and his face was gloomy. He lifted it up and looked from the cut on the neck, only to see some flesh and blood tissue. He immediately took out a dagger and pierced it, fiddling with some intracranial tissue. Very soon, he saw a wriggling blood-colored bug in the crevice of one of the brain tissues that had fallen out. Its body was chubby and extremely flexible. The parasitic soul worm of the corpse eater. Dean looked at the worm, his eyes flashing, and raised his hand to pinch it. Chapter 222. Dean naturally wouldn't let it succeed. He rubbed his fingers and rubbed out the part of its body that had penetrated into his fingers. There was no blood or wound on his fingers. If I bring it back to the giant wall and hand it over to the Holy Church, the value of the parasitic soul worm would be about 50,000 to 80,000 gold coins. Although it's not a rare monster, but it's a relatively precious existence among the ordinary monsters. It's the same level as Glenn's ghost eye magic mark. Dean's eyes revealed a thoughtful look. According to the Monster Atlas, the primary ability of the magic mark is to resist the undead virus and eat the undead. In the Monster Atlas, most of the records about the abilities of the monster stayed at the primary level. As for what kind of ability would appear after the second evolution, it was unknown. If he got the magic mark and had the physique of light, then the hunting time outside the giant wall would be extended indefinitely. He could hunt the undead as food to supplement himself when he was thirsty and hungry. Moreover, he could be immune to the virus in the undead, which meant that he would be more resistant to other plague diseases. Even for hunters, there was a chance of dying from the Black Death during the second season of the Black Death. If I let it drill into my body, it will immediately climb to the corpse of the parasitic soul worm on my chest. It will occupy the magpie's nest, which is equivalent to replacing the magic mark of the parasitic soul worm. When Glenn hunted the Black Weaver, she directly let the parasitic soul worm in the Black Weaver's blood occupy her magic mark. It's not so much a magic mark as a nest built by the corpse of the soul worm. Dean's eyes flashed as he recalled the words of the young instructor who had taught him archery. If you want to stimulate the potential of the magic mark for the second time, you must use the blood of other parasitic soul worms for baptism. Although it was called baptism, it was not to directly smear its blood on the magic mark on the chest. Instead, it was to extract its blood and inject it into the magic mark with a syringe. The impurities would be eliminated, and the remaining cells would moisturize the magic mark so that the magic mark would transform again. Dean didn't intend to bring the magic mark back to the giant wall. In that case, it would first be handed over to the Holy Church for evaluation. Then it would be converted according to gold coins and a certain fee would be collected. This was also one of the terms of the contract for the Holy Church to lease the giant wall. All the things brought back by the consortium must be handed over to the border tax. Moreover, Dean guessed that the other consortiums would soon get the news once the monster was brought back. At present, the situation inside the giant wall was that the consortiums were watching each other. They were waiting for them to go bankrupt. They were waiting for them to die outside the giant wall. At that time, there would be no hunters. They could easily monopolize the Ryan family's industry. They could only rely on their capital. If these consortiums knew that not only did he return, but he also brought out a named demon from the tunnel of death, they would most likely have some ideas and even think of a way to occupy this tunnel. Dean looked at the twisting magic mark in his hand. After a moment of silence, he put it into a box. He used a dagger to cut off part of the flesh of the corpse eater and put it into the box. Then he closed the box and left a small gap for the air to breathe. Injection container. Dean's eyes swept around. The old products outside the giant wall had long turned into dust. Naturally, he couldn't find any syringes or syringes. He remembered that when he was studying as a scavenger, he had read about a plant called speargrass. It grew in a relatively dry place outside the giant wall. It was hollow inside, pointed and thin. The sap contained anesthetic effects. Most of the anesthetics inside the giant wall were extracted from the speargrass. He stepped on the ground. It was relatively dry. However, he didn't see any speargrass. He carried his bag and other items. He held the box and walked along the slightly yellowish area of the weed. A moment later, he saw a large piece of speargrass in the weed. Dean immediately dropped his bag and cut off a few speargrass with his dagger. He looked at the box in his hand and opened it. He saw the corpse of the parasitic soul worm lying on the piece of flesh inside. Its spirit was somewhat dispirited. If the host died too long, the parasitic soul worm wouldn't find a new host, it would also die. But even if it died, it could be used as a material to stimulate the magic mark, as long as it didn't rot. Dean pinched it out and found a clean and wide leaf. He put it on the bag and then put the parasitic soul worm on the leaf. He hammered it with the metal handle of the dagger. With just one blow, the parasitic soul worm's soft body was broken. Very thick blood flowed out from inside. Dean quickly crushed the blood and poured it along the larger end into the speargrass. The whole process was extremely slow with only his right hand. When all the blood was poured into the speargrass, he took off the hunter's armor, revealing his pale chest. He saw a dark blood-like tissue in the middle of his chest. He was a little nervous. He took a deep breath, pinched the tip of the speargrass, and gently pierced it into the raised blood vessel-like magic mark. The sharp pain suddenly pierced Dean's nerve. The sharp pain made him feel like his scalp was going to explode. This magic mark was extremely weak and fatal. He didn't dare to pierce too deep. Otherwise, if he pierced through the magic mark, it would be equivalent to suicide. When the spear grass was a little bit deep, he immediately put the tip in his mouth, puffed his cheeks, and blew hard. The air squeezed the parasitic soul worm's corpse pulp inside and injected it along the sharp tip into the blood vessel-like magic mark. Dean felt as if something foreign had entered his heart. This feeling was extremely strange and painful. He was sweating and pushing the corpse pulp inside little by little into the magic mark. After pushing out more than half, he felt that there was some air leaking. He pulled out the spear grass and saw that there was only some skin inside, but the thick blood was gone. Dean looked down at the magic mark. The small hole that was pierced by the spear grass had healed. The adhesion was extremely amazing. He could still feel the bursts of pain from the magic mark, as well as the cold and hot feeling. This feeling was extremely strange, as if it was wrapped in a few pieces of freezing ice, but it was burning. He couldn't tell whether it was too cold or too hot. Dean was tired. He leaned on the bag to rest. As time passed, the pain from the magic mark on his chest gradually subsided. Instead, it was filled with a very hot feeling, as if there was magma flowing inside. He gently touched it with his fingers. It was scalding hot. When he injected the corpse of the ghoul, the magic mark had swelled to its fullest, but now it was shrinking little by little, as if it was digesting. Dean felt extremely uncomfortable. Bursts of sleepiness hit his mind. He shook his head, braced up his spirit, picked up the bag, and returned to the direction of the giant wall. However, he had only taken a few steps when a strong drowsiness completely overwhelmed him. Although he knew that this was the wilderness and it was extremely dangerous, it was still difficult for him to resist the drowsiness that was like a landslide or a tsunami. He weakly sat on the ground and fainted. Dean didn't know how much time had passed, but he was awakened by the cold wind. He hadn't opened his eyes when he suddenly woke up. He quickly opened his eyes and saw red clouds hanging in the sky. A giant sun was setting in the west. It was dusk. Dean hurriedly sniffed around. He immediately smelled two strange odors in the place where the previous battle took place. It should be the smell of blood that had attracted the monsters. Cold sweat broke out on his back. He secretly rejoiced. If the monsters had come close to him while he was asleep, then he would have been completely finished. Fortunately, the smell of blood covered his smell, so he didn't encounter any danger. Then he thought of the magic mark on his chest. He quickly looked down and was a little surprised. He saw that the blood vessels of the magic mark had returned to its usual saturation state, but the length was a third longer than before. Previously it was only half the length of a pinky finger, but now it was the length of 2 pinky fingers. Dean reached out his hand and touched it. He didn't feel any pain. Instead, he felt that his fingers were very cold. He immediately put on the hunter's armor. Seeing that the night was coming, he immediately picked up the bag and turned to leave. When the sky was completely dark, Dean had returned to the ruins that he had previously cleaned. He hid in the basement of a collapsed building which was covered with moss. It was full of dust and vines. He casually cleaned a place and sat down. He picked up dry firewood along the way and burned it into a fire. The warm flame baked his body and dispelled some of the chill. Chapter 223. The potential of the magic mark has been stimulated, but my sense of smell doesn't seem to improve. Dean's eyes flashed slightly. When he was a primary hunter, his magic mark had 3 abilities. The first was super sense of smell, the second was dark vision, and the third was the ability to digest cold crystals. Compared to the ghoul magic mark, there was one more ability. Perhaps this was the advantage of the rare magic mark. I don't know if I got a new ability or if the previous ability was strengthened. Dean was nervous and looking forward to it. If it was a new ability, he needed to verify it one by one to know what it was. Just like the resistance to the undead virus in the ghoul magic mark. If he hadn't been bitten by an undead, he naturally wouldn't know that he had this ability. He immediately sank his heart and captured the smell around him. Soon he determined that his sense of smell had not been strengthened. Although there was some improvement compared to the previous one, but the extent should be caused by the physical enhancement. It must be known that the effect of the ability enhancement was usually doubled. Excluding the sense of smell, the verification of the dark vision was even simpler. He just looked at the dark corner and felt that his vision was no different from before. It could be seen that both of them had not been strengthened. The only thing left is to digest the cold crystals. Dean immediately took out the cold crystals that he had hunted in the past 2 days. Including the cold crystals from the horned sickle zombie, there were a total of 25 cold crystals. All of them were stored in a small metal box. The metal box seemed to be frozen. 23 cold crystals were absorbing the heat inside. When the box was opened, a thin white cold air floated out. Dean's eyes swept the box and picked out a small cold crystal. It came from the skull of a juvenile sickle zombie. He glanced at his left hand, which was wrapped in white bandages. He hesitated. He didn't know if his left hand could absorb the cold crystal. After hesitating again and again, he chose his right hand. Last time, his left hand was covered with cold crystals because of excessive absorption. This time, there should be no problem if he only absorbed one. He bit his finger and blood flowed out. Then he pressed his finger on the cold crystal. Soon, the cold crystal exuded an amazing cold air. It almost froze his palm. The hard cold crystal quickly softened under his finger. Like mucus, it flowed into the wound and quickly disappeared. Dean only felt a cold liquid quickly crawling along the blood vessels in his arm over his shoulder, flowing back to his heart along the winding route. At that moment, His heart was so cold that it throbbed fiercely, and his whole body could not help but shiver. The next moment, the cold feeling started from his heart, flowed along several arteries to the forked blood vessels, and spread all over his body. The cold feeling filled his body, and his body temperature dropped rapidly. When the cold reached the limit of endurance, a boiling heat suddenly gushed out from all parts of his body. In this extreme cold, Dean's senses couldn't distinguish whether it was cold or hot. But very quickly, he felt a boiling heat spread throughout his body like a volcano eruption. The extreme alternating of hot and cold made him feel as if his blood was boiling and bursting, filled with exuberant strength, as if there were countless muscles twisting and growing in his arms. What a strong effect! Dean was shocked. This was the first time he absorbed the cold crystal of a mutated sickle zombie. He didn't expect the effect to be so significant. Not only his tired energy was restored, but his body was full of power. In the past, he had absorbed more than 10 ordinary walking corpses' cold crystals, but the effect wasn't as strong as it was now. After a while, the feeling of blood boiling gradually calmed down. Dean was not satisfied. Looking at the remaining cold crystals, he wanted to grab another one to absorb. But thinking of the fate of his left hand, he held back. If his right hand also lost consciousness, it would be extremely inconvenient to do things in the future. This was the case in the battle with the ghoul. Although he could burst out more power than the limit of his limbs, it would also hurt his body at the same time. Moreover, without consciousness, it would be extremely difficult to control the subtle power. "I hope my left hand can recover," Dean prayed in his heart. After a moment, his thoughts returned to his body. Because it was the first time he absorbed the cold crystal of a mutated sickle zombie, it was difficult for him to distinguish whether his absorption ability was strengthened or not. If it was an ordinary cold crystal, he could distinguish it, because he was not sure whether the previous strong effect was caused by the absorption ability or the difference of the cold crystal itself. After tomorrow morning, I will return to the giant wall and wait for the arm injury to recover. Anyway, now the passage to the giant wall has been rented. I think I can come out at any time. I don't need to wait for the consortium's allocation like in the past. Dean made up his mind, leaned against the wall to rest, closed his eyes lightly, and entered into a light sleep. The night was getting darker. There was no movement throughout the night. At 11 or 12 o'clock in the evening, Dean smelled 2 or 3 odors close to 3 or 4 miles away, but it seemed that they were just passing by and left along the track. The next day, the sky was bright. Dean woke up. The pile of firewood had long been extinguished, but the charcoal was still warm. He took out the dry food and water, ready to fill his stomach. When he reached out to grab the metal kettle, he was suddenly startled. He saw that his fingernails had become a little sharp. He remembered that before he came outside the giant wall, he had cut his fingernails. Yesterday, before he went to sleep, his fingers were still fine. When he woke up, his nails had become longer. Moreover, his nails were oval, but now they were sharp, a bit like the claws of a beast. He suddenly thought of his magic marks. Did it mean that his 3 abilities were not strengthened, but stimulated a new ability? But this new ability was the rapid growth of the nails? The joy in his heart suddenly turned into distress. There were many magic marks that were judged to be ordinary. When they evolved to the 2nd or 3rd stage, they would often have extremely powerful abilities. Thus, ordinary magic marks were judged to be rare magic marks. Similarly, some rare magic marks could also have extremely poor abilities when they evolved in the later stages. Thus, they were reduced to ordinary magic marks. Just the ability to sharpen and harden his fingernails was a completely useless ability. After all, armors and weapons were forged by human wisdom. Compared to the fur and claws of the creature itself, they were stronger and sharper. There was no need to fight with bare hands. What the hell is this? Dean was speechless. He poked his linen backpack with his fingers, but didn't pierce it. The bitterness in his heart was even stronger. For a time, he didn't have the mood to stand up. He sat in a daze for a long time. He gradually accepted this fact. He grabbed the kettle and drank 2 mouthfuls of water. He felt bitter in his mouth. He shook his head and no longer thought about it. Relying on the night vision and super sense of smell, he was comparable to ordinary intermediate hunters. The most important thing was that he had the ability to absorb cold crystals, which could help him evolve quickly. Thinking of this, his heart was a little comforted. He was ready to get up and leave. Suddenly, water flowed out of his palm, pulling his thoughts back. He was startled. When he looked back, he found that the kettle was broken. Dean secretly cursed his bad luck. Suddenly, his mind was struck by lightning. His whole body was stunned. His eyes widened as he looked at the kettle again. He saw the water gurgling out from the hole on the edge of the kettle. This hole was the place where his fingers were grabbing. At this moment, his fingernails had penetrated into the kettle. Piercing the metal? Dean's mind couldn't react. If the cloth couldn't be pierced, how could it pierce the metal? He immediately moved his fingers to the edge of the kettle. He was surprised to see that the metal kettle was easily cut by his fingernails like a piece of paper. Chapter 224. This verification made Dean believe that he was not hallucinating. The nails that grew out of the human body could really cut through the indestructible metal, and he did not use any strength at all. Once again, he used his nails to cut the linen bag next to him, but did not pierce the bag. The nails that could cut gold like mud suddenly failed. Dean was surprised. He grabbed all the things around him and tried again. After a while, he finally came to a result. His nails would only show the strange sharpness when facing metal. Facing cloth, stone, flesh, hair, and so on, they all failed. It was just like ordinary nails, but a little sharper. The hardest metal is the weakest in front of these nails? Dean's eyes flashed. His heart was full of surprise and surprise. But since childhood, his father taught him to be good at thinking, so he gradually pondered. First of all, he was sure that metal was absolutely harder than cloth. From the current many experiments, it could be seen that nails were only effective on metal. Metal was composed of metal particles. In order to test different metals, he grabbed daggers and swords, including his own arrowheads. Without exception, all of them could be easily pierced. Only when he grabbed the lead plate in the inner layer of the hunter, the penetration speed of the nails was slower. In the process of penetration, Dean found that when the nails touched the metal, it seemed to gush out a layer of oil, making the nails look extremely bright. But when he grabbed cloth and other things, there was no such layer of oil. Seeing this layer of luster, Dean's heart suddenly flashed a light, thinking of the repulsion between different element particles. His fingers could pierce into the metal. Perhaps it had nothing to do with the sharpness of the nails itself, but the layer of oil secreted from the nails and the metal particles repelled each other. Moreover, it was an extraordinary repulsion, which could deform the metal in a short time. Thinking of this, Dean was somewhat relieved. This seemed to be the only explanation at present. Otherwise, it would be difficult to cut the cloth with the sharpness of the nails, let alone the metal. So this is the intermediate ability of the magic mark of the defiler, metal repelling. In this case, it has an unexpected effect when fighting with others, but it doesn't have much effect when it comes to hunting monsters. Dean frowned slightly. Although this ability had the ability to penetrate metal, it was still of little value. Unless he practiced hard in melee combat, this ability would not play a big role for a long-range hunter. However, nothing was perfect in this world. After the previous setback, he quickly accepted this ability. He thought that in the future, he could make some metal carvings. That would be a unique skill. Dean continued to study it but didn't find any new function. He could only give up. He ate dry food, packed his bags and climbed out of a collapsed narrow stone path. He breathed the fresh air outside and returned to the direction of the giant wall. Half a day later, Dean returned to the giant wall. He didn't encounter other monsters along the way. It could be seen that the number of monsters in this area was not much. Probably 10 years ago there were too many monsters. Due to the large amount of food demand, the number of monsters here was rapidly decreasing. Therefore, it was difficult to see monsters wandering from other places in a short period of time. Looking at the towering giant wall, Dean sighed deeply. He came to the entrance. Because the giant wall blocked the light, there was less sunlight. The plants were much sparser than in the distance. 10 boxes of gunpowder were piled up on the giant wall behind the entrance. They were covered with tarpaulin. When he came out this time, Dean thought that he would encounter those horrible monsters. He would use these explosives to make traps to hunt them. Now it seemed that this plan could only be temporarily shelved. The next time his body recovered, he would go deeper into the outer edge of the area. It was estimated that he would use these gunpowder. Moreover, this time the ghoul was blown up by a box of gunpowder, but its body was only slightly injured. This also gave him a more intuitive feeling about the defensive power of these monsters and the power of gunpowder. If he encountered some extremely horrible monsters, perhaps these 10 boxes of explosives alone may not be able to kill them. The next time I come, I will continue to bring more. Dean thought in his heart. Now that he was the only one in and out of this passage, it didn't matter if the gunpowder was stored here. His eyes swept through the grass and found the place where the key was buried. He took out the key and opened the huge iron lock of the passage. He untied the thumb-thick iron chain and lifted the passage. Looking at the dark passage, Dean's heart suddenly moved. He closed the passage and turned to the nearby gunpowder storage. He took out 20 of the remaining 24 cold crystals in his bag, especially the cold crystal of the horned sickle zombie. Only 4 cold crystals were left in the bag. After doing this, Dean opened the passage again. He went down the dark steps and slowly closed the huge iron door. He wrapped the thick chain in the convex ring of the iron door and locked it. Along the long passage back to the wall, Dean saw 2 knights of light who were guarding outside the passage. The 2 heard the movement and turned around alertly. They immediately saw Dean, who was carrying a backpack. One of them immediately said, "Please stop, don't move." Dean stood at the entrance of the passage. The other knight of light looked at him, took out a whistle from his bosom, and blew it. A moment later, a messenger crow flew over from afar. The radiant knight took out something from his bosom and tied it to the black crow's leg before releasing it. Dean knew that they were going to inform the security office, so he sat on the ground and waited quietly. Seeing his arrogance, the 2 of them revealed an indistinct look of loathing in their eyes and focused all their attention on guarding against him. After a moment, a team of cavalry came. All of them were wearing bright silver armor. Only 2 of them were wearing official knight of light armors. The rest were squires. There was a huge carriage in the middle of the cavalry. It was made of steel and was extremely strong. Dean suddenly thought that if his nails had such ability before he went to prison, then perhaps it would be easier to escape from the prison. "Get in the carriage," one of the Knights of Light said to Dudian in a deep voice. His eyes under the silver helmet stared at Dudian coldly. Dean sat cross-legged. "Hurry up, I'm in a hurry." "Humph." The Knight of Light coldly snorted and waved. "Let's go." The caravan turned around and drove back the way they came. Chapter 225. 7 days passed in a blink of an eye in the purification cell. The Ryan family's carriage was already waiting for Dudian on the street. The coachman was Barton. "Your hand." Barton's face changed as he saw Dean. He noticed that Dean's arm was wrapped in bandages and hung in front of his chest. Dudian said, "Let's go back and talk about it." After he sat down, Barton raised his horsewhip and slapped it, and the carriage slowly drove away. Dudian sat in the carriage after leaving the town. Did anything happen to the Ryan family while I was away from the giant wall? Barton shook the whip and whispered, No. It was the same as usual. The day after you left, old Foulin called his third son Sandro to his room. He dismissed all the servants. I don't know what they were discussing. Dudien's eyes lit up as he nodded. When you came back, Patriarch Foulin was very happy to hear about you, Barton added. Dudien nodded and didn't say anything. A moment later, the carriage arrived at the border fortress. The soldiers on duty checked the certificate and the hunter's medal issued by Shou Jing, and then let them go. A few hours later, they returned to the Ryan castle from the wilderness of Longsong's stronghold. Dudien got off the carriage and saw Patriarch Jake and his third son Sandro waiting at the door. There were also 2 people in the third generation. They were Hugh and Jake's daughter Pina. Pina was the daughter of Jake. She was the daughter of the third generation. Barton jumped off the carriage and trotted over to help Dudien. Dudien waved his hand to indicate that he didn't need to. He didn't want to move the bones in his left hand. At this time, old Foulin and others who were waiting at the door saw Dudien's injured arm. The smile on their faces changed as they quickly came to greet him. Sandro was worried that his father would fall. He carefully supported him all the way. Mr. Dean, your arm. Jake, who was the first to run over, saw Dudien's bandaged left hand. He asked, Is it serious? Will you be able to fight in the future? Old Foulin frowned as he heard his words. Bastard! Jake came to his senses and quickly said, Mr. Dean, is your body important? Quickly go in and rest. Dean looked at him and said to old Foulin, I'll trouble you to find a few good doctors to help me. My bones are broken. Old Foulin's face slightly changed. I will take care of this. You go in and rest. He looked at Sander. Hurry up and help Mr. Dean. Dean waved his hand to stop Sander and returned to the castle with old Foulin. They came to Dean's room on the 2nd floor. Old Foulin saw that it was getting late, so he dismissed them all. He looked at Dean, who was leaning against the wall, and asked, Are you really injured? Dean said, Don't you think so? Old Foulin's face slightly changed as he saw Dean admit it. He smiled. If I knew it would be like this, then I wouldn't have rented this passage. The news of your injury will soon spread to the ears of other consortia. It will be a huge blow to our consortium, Dean said. It's not that there are no benefits. At least they will despise us. Old Foulin smiled. I'm just worried that your body will be injured. It will affect the future hunting. Dean said, It won't. It's just my body that's injured. Even if my arm is crippled, I can still hunt monsters. Old Foulin didn't understand his words but didn't refute. I'll find the best doctor for you. Don't be discouraged. Even if I spend all the money I have to cure you. I'm not discouraged. Dean smiled. My will won't surrender so easily. Old Foulin was relieved to see him smile. What is the situation outside the passage? The danger factor is lower than what we thought, Dudien said. After so many years, most of the monsters outside the passage have been eaten. Most of the terrifying monsters have left this place and migrated to other places with rich food. But I haven't gone deep yet. The situation is not optimistic. Maybe I will go deeper to explore after I become a senior hunter. Old Foulin nodded. He looked at Dean, who was lying in bed. You are a few years younger than my grandson. It's really hard for you to support the entire consortium by yourself. If we have enough savings, then we can recruit a few hunters to assist you. To be an extraordinary person, you have to do extraordinary things first. Dean smiled. Don't forget our alchemy items. If we recruit other hunters, then it's inevitable that we will be exposed. Old Foulin sighed. Other consortia have hunting teams that act together. There is a clear division of labor. If you are alone, then it's inevitable that you won't be able to take care of things. I'll make do for the time being. Once we have enough savings, then I'll have a candidate, Dean said. Old Foulin looked at him. Will it be the 3 little guys that you brought? Of course not. Dean said. Their physique isn't suitable for fighting outside the giant wall. Moreover, we don't have time to awaken a wolf cub. I'll find a few real wolves when you have enough gold coins. Old Foulin was surprised. He didn't think that Dudian would have such connections. It seemed that his understanding of the boy was too little. He didn't continue to ask but said, "As for money, we have about 12,000 gold coins in our hands. The new textile machines have been promoted in various places. Our textile factory has received very few orders. Now we can only rely on the monthly dividends of the Scott Consortium and your hunting. The total value of your hunting materials has been identified by the Temple of Element. The total value is 328 gold coins and 17 silver coins. It's a gratifying harvest for the first exploration." Dean asked, "Can I take back the 4 cold crystals that I have hunted?" Old Foulin shook his head. "It's very difficult. Although the value of cold crystals is only 1 gold coin, but it's a forbidden item." Dean paid attention to his words. "So, there is a way," Old Foulin helplessly said. "As long as there is money, there will be a way. If you insist on it, then I can help you get 4 cold crystals. But you will need to pay a big price. You will need at least hundreds of gold coins to send 4 cold crystals." Dean immediately said, "Then help me get them out. But it must be the 4 cold crystals that I have hunted. I have a way to identify the others. Make sure that the people inside don't fool me." Old Foulin was surprised. "Are these cold crystals that important? Even if I have to spend 200 gold coins, I have to get them," Dean said. Old Foulin understood. "All right, I will help you get them. Thank you." "There is no need to thank me." The next day, Old Foulin called for a doctor and brought him upstairs to diagnose Dean. The doctor was a middle-aged man. He was accompanied by a gentle and delicate girl who was carrying his medical box. "Hello, Mr. Dean." The middle-aged man introduced himself. He saw the gauze on Dean's arm. "I need to take it off. If it hurts, please relax your body." Dean nodded and handed over his arm. "Sorry to trouble you." The middle-aged man politely asked the girl to open the medical box. He took out a pair of scissors and cut the bandage. Dean's left hand was exposed. Chapter 226. Middle-aged doctor and Old Foulin didn't expect the injury to be so serious. Their faces slightly changed as they looked at Dudian. Their hearts were shocked as they thought of how Dudian had lifted his arm casually. What kind of willpower was that? The girl who was waiting for instructions in front of the medical box was shocked. She didn't expect that the teenager who was almost the same age as her would suffer such terrible pain. Her eyes couldn't help but reveal a bit of pity. Dudian felt her gaze and glanced at her. He looked at the middle-aged doctor. "Can it be cured?" Middle-aged doctor recovered and said, "You have a fracture problem. I have to take a closer look." He reached out and gently touched Dudian's arm. He immediately felt the uneven and irregular hard bones under the flesh. It was as if there were countless stones piled up inside. His face changed as he looked at Dudian in shock. He immediately saw Dudian's calm eyes. His heart was even more shocked. But he was an adult after all. He quickly restrained his emotions. He said with lingering fear, "Your bones are broken too seriously. If you want to cure it, it will be very difficult." "Difficult is not a problem. There is hope." Dudian looked at him. "Do you need to do surgery?" Middle-aged doctor nodded. "Yes, we need to peel off the skin of your arm to see the extent of your fracture. If there is no defect, then arrange it back to its original shape. If it is fixed, then recuperate for a few years. Perhaps there is a low hope for healing." Dudian nodded. In this era, such medical skills were quite brilliant. It was necessary to have a deep understanding of the human skeleton in order to reorder the broken bone. "Then I will leave it to you," Dudian said. "Okay, I will try my best to help you." Middle-aged doctor reached out to the girl. "Bandage." The girl immediately handed it to him. He used a new bandage to wrap Dudien's arm again. He got up and said, "Today is the first time I came here. I didn't bring enough tools. I will come back tomorrow." Go. Dudien nodded. Middle-aged doctor slightly bowed to Dudien and old Foulin. Then, accompanied by the housekeeper, he left with the girl's assistant. "Your injury is so heavy." After the middle-aged doctor left, old Foulin looked at him. "There are some painkillers in my room. I'll send them to you." "No." Dean shook his head. "Pain can make me stronger." He didn't want to tell old Foulin about the numbness in his left hand. He attached great importance to his physical condition and kept it a secret unless he was forced to. Old Foulin sighed as he looked at Dudien's calm eyes. "I'll ask the butler to improve your meals. Have a good rest." Then he left the room. The next day, the middle-aged doctor came over with a large medical box to perform surgery on Dean. "You can sleep for a while. This is the best anesthetic. It's long-lasting and you won't feel any pain," middle-aged doctor said to Dudien. Although it was the second time they met, but Dudien's performance yesterday had left a deep impression on him. Dean said, "You don't have to worry about me. I won't interfere with your operation." Middle-aged doctor didn't try to persuade him. He let the girl apply the anesthetic to Dean and started the operation. Through the surgery, it was discovered that the damage to the left hand was not only limited to the bones. These broken bones had also cut and punctured the blood vessels and meridians, causing the left hand to be almost necrotic. Halfway through the operation, the middle-aged doctor was so nervous that he was sweating profusely. First, he helped Dean arrange the broken fingertip-sized bones. According to the shape comparison, he put the bones back in place, then he sutured the meridians and the main blood vessels. The operation lasted for 4 or 5 hours. Anesthetics were applied 4 times in the middle. Each time the effect was about 1 hour. In the afternoon, the operation was completely over. Dean's left hand was stitched up and fixed with 4 splints. The middle-aged doctor almost collapsed. He warned Dean, "Don't touch water during the healing stage. Don't use force. If there is any uncomfortable reaction, inform me immediately. I'll come back once a week for a follow-up." "Thank you." After the middle-aged doctor left, old Foulin came into the room. "How do you feel? Do you feel better?" Dean smiled. "How can it be so fast? Is there any news about us in today's newspaper?" "Look at you. You are still concerned about this matter." Old Foulin looked at him. "As expected, the other consortiums have learned about your injury. Moreover, it has been published in the Hunters newspaper. You are a little famous in the Hunters circle. But it's not a good name," Dean said. "Let me have a look." Old Foulin ordered the butler outside. After a moment, a few newspapers were handed over. Dean picked up one of the newspapers and saw some familiar words. "Green Consortium has hunted an unknown monster. According to the assessment of the Temple of Elements, the monster's bone marrow contains extremely high fat content. It can be made into a portable torch for exploration. Melon Consortium's Area Number 6 has been completely cleaned up. There may be a lot of money in the short term. Scott Consortium has lost 3 official primary hunters in the cleanup of Area Number 7. They have hunted a rare monster called Corruptor. They haven't decided whether to sell their magic marks." Dean looked through the news. Corruptor was ranked in the top 30 of the Monster Atlas. According to the assessment of the inner wall, the monsters were divided into 3 levels: ordinary, rare, and rare. Above the rare ones were the 8 legendary monsters. In the more than 200 years of history of the hunter profession, the 8 legendary monsters had appeared one after another. It was a rare encounter for decades. The number of hunters who had obtained the 8 legendary monsters could be counted on one's fingers. In total, there were no more than 5 people. The most recent hunter who had obtained the 8 legendary monsters was 30 years ago. He came from the Noel Consortium. At that time, the Noel Consortium was pushed to the first place among the many consortiums. However, the legendary hunter had fallen outside the giant wall. His body wasn't found. Since then, the Noel Consortium's economy had declined. Now it was only ranked third among the consortiums. Corruptor's magic marks are at the same level as a ghoul. Dean's mouth slightly moved. It was a luxury to use a rare monster as a material to stimulate the magic marks. New World Consortium rented the Death Passage. They sent an intermediate hunter to explore the way. They have returned. It is reported that the hunter's arm was seriously injured. The harvest was low. Dean turned to the bottom and saw the news about himself. It occupied a relatively large space. He knew that it wasn't because of the New World Consortium, but because of the existence of the Death Passage. Chapter 227. Master. At this time, the butler gently knocked on the door. Come in. Old Foulin turned to look at the middle-aged butler. What's the matter? Master, Mr. John is waiting for you in the hall. The middle-aged butler bowed. Old Foulin was startled for a moment but nodded. I'll go down. He told Dudien to take care of his body. Then he let the butler help him to leave. After reading the Hunter's newspaper, Dean continued to read other newspapers. He found out that his new textile machine had spread to various regions due to the competition between the two giants, Scott Consortium and Mellon Consortium. In this era of communication congestion, he was able to have such a high reputation in such a short period of time. It was inseparable from the fierce competition between the two giants. The inventor of the new textile machine, Mr. Dean, has personally given us the blueprints. We are an orthodox original. The new textile machine will never have any parts failure, damage, and other problems. The Scott Consortium's highest statement was written in one of the newspapers of the Scott Consortium. Although there was no awareness of copyright in this world, except for alchemists and other dark professions, there were no laws to regulate plagiarism. However, the lack of awareness of copyright didn't mean that there was no concept of counterfeiting. Even ordinary civilians wanted to buy the most formal and sophisticated product. They didn't want others to imitate them. The importance of this statement was undoubtedly critical and fatal. It seems that the Mellon Consortium doesn't have the capital to compete with the Scott Consortium. It's only a matter of time before they suffer a crushing defeat. Other consortia who want to intervene will only be able to grab a small share of the market and profits. Dudien saw the current situation. The Scott Consortium had provided the blueprint. They had taken the lead in producing the new textile machine and occupied a large share of the market. Now there was this statement. As long as there were no problems in the later stage of the operation, this big cake could be eaten. It could even become one of the main industries of the Scott Consortium in the future. At this time, old Foulin came back from the outside. Dean's sense of smell had picked up another smell from the living room. It had left the castle and was mixed with the smell of horses. Is there any difficulty? Dean asked as he saw Dudien's worried expression. Old Foulin looked at him and sighed. Mr. John is a new rich businessman. His assets are more than 10,000 gold coins. He started his business by mining. He heard that our consortium is renting the giant wall, so he wanted to cooperate with us. They will provide equipment production fees, and we will provide hunters to hunt outside the giant wall. They will get 20% of the resources and the rest will belong to us. Dean said. Did he come over to withdraw his intention of cooperation? Old Foulin nodded. If it's only him, then it's okay. But I'm worried that the news of your injury will spread. Other people who want to cooperate with us will dispel the idea. If that's the case, then it will be too difficult to develop the Ryan family's business and your hunting funds. Dean comforted him. We don't need to count on these small characters. Even if we cooperate with them, the efficiency of making money is too slow. Moreover, they want to get 20% of the profits just by providing equipment. A group of people who haven't seen the dangers outside the giant wall have completely regarded this as an investment game. Old Foulin smiled. Although the sand is small, but it can be gathered into a tower. Dean shook his head. A tower made of sand can't withstand the storm. Even a small storm can cut a lot of sand. If my right arm is restored, then I can rely on hunting alone to make money. At this point, he couldn't help but look at his left hand. What he was most worried about was that his left hand couldn't be healed. If that was the case, his battle strength would be greatly reduced in the future. Moreover, the archery he had painstakingly practiced for several years would be in vain. He would have to relearn his one-handed combat skills. If he wanted to master a new skill, it would take another 2 to 3 years. Old Foulin also looked at his bandaged arm. His face was bitter, but he didn't say anything. You have a good recovery. In the following days, Dean didn't run around, but stayed in the Ryan castle to recuperate. He asked the butler to buy him some paper and pen. He wrote and drew in his room. The papers were scattered on the ground. Old Foulin occasionally came to check on his condition. He noticed the things on the paper and asked curiously, "What is this?" "Cannon," Dean replied briefly. Old Foulin naturally didn't understand the meaning of these two words. He felt that the combination of these two words was a bit strange. However, he knew that Dudien didn't want to talk about it. So he didn't ask. Moreover, it would make him look more profound. In addition to writing and drawing, Dean would occasionally go out for a walk. He would exercise his body, bask in the sun, or come to the training ground. He would use his right hand to play with swords, daggers, knives, daggers, and other weapons. It seemed that he was just playing with them for fun. Old Foulin's children, who were paying attention to Dean's physical condition, were worried. The types of cold weapons are a bit poor. Dean played with the spear. Because of the existence of knights, the spear had become a sacred symbol. No one tried to change the structure of the spear to reproduce weapons, such as halberds and daggers. It's a bit difficult to use a spear with one hand. It's better to use a sword or a dagger. Although the diagnosis hadn't come out yet and he wasn't sure whether his left arm would be healed or not. But Dean was ready for the worst. He had to replan his future route. In the blink of an eye, more than a month had passed. The middle-aged doctor had come to check up on Dean 4 times. Every time he left with a sigh. According to him, Dean's left arm was necrotic. The blood couldn't flow to all parts of the arm. The healing of the bones was very weak. Moreover, as time went on, the broken bones would gradually rot and eventually wouldn't be able to recover. Dean's heart was full of loss and pain, even though he was prepared for such a result. On this day, he left the Ryan castle by carriage. He said that he was going out to relax. Old Foulin didn't think much about it. He told him to protect his left arm so that it wouldn't get hurt. Chapter 228. Dean put on a black robe and mask as he entered the town. Once again, he came to the front of the manor. Dean saw the guards at the door. He handed over the temporary identity certificate that was issued to him last time. Several guards took turns to check and let him pass. Dean saw 4 attendants under the huge oil painting as he entered the hall of the castle. They came forward and handed over their temporary IDs. Then they entered the dark passage under the oil painting. I don't know if the last application was accepted or not. I was busy with the consortium, so I didn't have time to collect it. This time I can take a look at the result. Dean's eyes flashed as he stepped out of the dark passage. Soft light hit his face. He saw that the underground square was more lively than the last time. There were camouflaged dark professionals everywhere. Dean went along the square to look for the shops that sold goods. Soon he saw a shop opened by an alchemist of the Life faction. There were bottles of potions in the shop. Various biological organs were soaked in them. There were women's arms, baby's head, liver, heart, and other organs that were soaked in the potion. They were kept fresh. In addition to selling all kinds of life alchemy materials, the shop also sold several low-level alchemy recipes. Magic eye technique? Can you embed the eyeball of other creatures into your own eye socket and get the ability of other creatures' eyeballs? Dean was surprised as he saw the description of the alchemy. The alchemists of the Life faction were able to achieve such a level of biological transformation. Even in the old era, the technology in this area was only superficial. In theory, if the technology was developed to the extreme, it could be possible to replace the head and the heart. Then it could be called as immortality. This was the ultimate pursuit of all the Life factions. Dean looked at the other alchemy recipes. He didn't see any that could replace the arm. He immediately asked the shop owner, "Is there a way to treat the broken leg?" The shop owner's figure was slender and slender. Her mask was tied under her beautiful brown hair. She suppressed her original voice and said in a low voice, "It's very difficult to treat. This shop doesn't have a cure. But I can help you replace your thigh with a new one. There will be no side effects. This shop has superior leg materials from hunters. I guarantee that they are better than your own legs. Do you want to try?" Dean was startled and asked, "Hunter's thigh? How did you get here?" "That's a secret of the shop. Please forgive me," the shop owner said politely. Dean thought for a moment. "Do you know where to get treatment?" Seeing that he had no intention of buying, the shop owner's tone immediately became cold. He said, "I'm not sure about this. Maybe you should ask the star-level alchemist. There will be some clues." Dean slightly frowned and nodded. "Thank you. No need." Dean turned and left the shop. He searched in other shops. In addition to the alchemists of the Life faction, he also thought of potioneers. Although potioneers mainly made potions and were good at using poison, but after all they were in contact with pharmacology. Maybe there would be a way. Suddenly, a surprised voice rang out. "Hound? Oh no, Demon King?" Dean was surprised. He looked back and saw a pretty figure wearing an owl mask. Although there were many such masks, but the smell exuded from her body immediately reminded him. "Nightingale?" Yes. Nightingale knew that she wasn't mistaken when Dean called out her code name. "Why didn't you come back for so many days? Didn't you say that you would come back in 3 days to receive the medal?" Dean coughed. "I was delayed in the middle. How do you know that I haven't come back?" "Of course I know. I come here every day," Nightingale softly said. Dean smiled. "You are diligent." "I am not." Nightingale looked at him. "Didn't you come today to see the God's object?" Dean was surprised. "God's object?" Nightingale saw his reaction. "It seems that you really don't know. Come, I'll take you to see. I guarantee that you will be shocked." She went towards the dark hall in front of them. Dean was also curious, so he followed them. After entering the hall, Dean saw 10 dark knights standing in front of a huge cage on the side of the hall. The steel pillars of the cage were extremely thick. They were like the arms of adult men. It was stronger than any cage he had seen before. When he saw the object in the cage clearly, even with his indifferent disposition, his pupils couldn't help but constrict, and a strand of astonishment surged out from his heart, followed by wild joy. "Well, this is the God's object." Nightingale came to the hall and pointed at the cage, saying, "See, it's all metal, and it's not just a single metal, it's a very rare compound alloy. TSK, it's simply a masterpiece of the light god. My alloy alchemy is not worth mentioning compared to this." Dean didn't hear her words. His eyes were focused on the object inside the cage. He was very familiar with this thing. It was the freezer that he had been lying in for 300 years. It turns out that the freezer is missing. Dark Church found it. Dean felt his heartbeat speed up, and the blood in his whole body was faintly boiling. He couldn't wait to rush up and plunder it. With the remaining energy tubes in the freezer, He could learn a lot of knowledge from the superchip. Nightingale saw that Dean didn't answer but just stared at the object. She was quite satisfied. Isn't it shocking? Yes. Dean returned to his senses and nodded. Look at this curve, this curvature. I've never seen such a large model made of metal. It's hard to imagine how it was made. Moreover, it's been 300 years since the ancient era, yet it doesn't show any signs of decay. It's amazing. Nightingale couldn't help but express her amazement. Duddian looked at her and asked, "Why did this thing appear here?" Nightingale said, "It is said that it was moved here for us to visit. Do you see the gap in the middle? According to the speculation, the inside of this thing is empty. But there is no correct way to open it. The only way is to use violence to destroy it. So the Dark Church is gathering ideas to see if anyone knows the correct way to crack it. Look at the bounty column next to it." Chapter 229. 100,000 Alchemy Points? Dean was surprised. As far as he knew, the requirement to become a one-star alchemist was to accumulate 100 alchemy points. 2-star alchemy points required 1,000 points. 100,000 alchemy points was equivalent to the accumulation of a 4-star alchemist. Most of the 4-star alchemists had immersed themselves in alchemy for decades to have such an achievement. Now as long as they opened the so-called God's object, they could get it? Nightingale sighed. If I can learn some knowledge of the era, then maybe I can know how to open this God's object. Dean's mouth slightly twitched. He thought that it didn't matter how much knowledge she had. The freezer only locked his fingerprint and iris password. In addition to him, no one could open it unless they disassembled it by force. Will this thing always be here? Dean asked. Nightingale shook her head. I heard that it will be moved to another branch of the Dark Church. So while it is still here, we should observe it. Maybe we can get some inspiration. I heard that someone found the mystery of air flow from this God's object. I hope we can see the secret of the air flow. Dean wryly smiled. He thought that the secret of the freezer was not something that could be seen and understood by the current technology. However, he was quite moved as he thought about the reward of 100,000 alchemy points. He knew from Roseyard's notes that the higher the star metal, the higher the rights of the Dark Church. For example, a 3-star alchemist like Roseyard could dispatch a team of Dark Knights from the Dark Church to fight for him. The lowest level of the Dark Knights was comparable to a primary hunter's physique. Even the disciplinary members would find it difficult to deal with the Dark Knights. However, in order to mobilize the Dark Knights, one must be at least a 5-star alchemist. In addition to summoning the Dark Knights, one could receive a very high monthly salary. However, the best benefit for alchemists was to share the intelligence network of the Dark Church. They could collect information for themselves. The intelligence network of the Dark Church was extremely terrifying. The coverage was more dense and extensive than that of the Holy Church. They could penetrate into all fields. As long as they paid the corresponding price, they could quickly learn any information. Even some military secrets were no exception. This freezer disappeared 3 or 4 years ago. It should have fallen into the hands of the Dark Church for a long time. They haven't cracked the password for such a long time. If I open it, it will attract a lot of attention from all parties. It might even cause unwarranted suspicion and interrogation. In such a long period of time, they must have thought of every possible way. Even if I say that I opened it by coincidence, it won't make sense. Dean's eyes flashed, and the desire in his heart calmed down. He felt that the bounty notice was like a hook with a sharp barb. The bait was fat and tempting. If he couldn't resist the temptation, he would be finished. Thinking of this, he withdrew his gaze and said to Nightingale, "Let's go somewhere else." Nightingale saw that he was not in the mood to look at it, so she did not continue to force him to stay. She had already seen it countless times in the past few days, so a little while longer was not a big deal.
She said. You haven't received your medal, right?
I'll go with you. Dudian nodded. Both of them came to an empty counter in the hall. Dudian handed out the temporary ID card. I've come to receive my medal. There was an old man behind the counter who was responsible for the registration of newcomers. He didn't wear a mask and his face was full of stubble. He lazily yawned as he glanced at Dudian. It seemed that he was blaming him for disturbing his nap. He took the temporary ID card and looked at it. Oh, codename Devil? The old man squinted at Dudian. The little guy's tone is quite big. It's better to have a low-key codename. Be careful not to become the first target of the holy light of the Holy Church. Dudian just looked at him, but didn't speak. The old man saw that Dudian didn't answer him, so he felt that it would be rude to talk too much. He looked back at the small drawers on the wall. He searched for a moment and soon found a drawer box. He took out a bunch of keys from his waist and opened it. He took out a few items from the drawer box. This is your medal. This is your admission fee. This is the recommendation letter from the Holy Church to the Alchemy College. Little guy, I hope you can live eternally in the darkness. Welcome to join us. The old man handed over the medal and a bag of gold coins. His previous sleepy appearance became solemn. He raised his hand and made a commonly used prayer gesture in front of his chest. He prayed, "Sublimate in the darkness and return to the truth. The sun will sting your eyes, but the darkness will make your eyes bright. From now on you will become a believer of my Lord. You will serve my Lord for life. You will find the truth in the hypocrisy. If you betray me, you will suffer the punishment of purgatory. Do you understand?" Understood. Dudian nodded. This was the initiation ceremony. The dark church believed in the true God. The Holy Church called the God of light a false god. The Holy Church called the God of the dark church a devil. After the initiation ceremony, the old man's expression returned to normal. He waved his hand. "If there is nothing else, then go and do what you need to do. Don't disturb my nap." Dudian put away the gold coins on the table. They were heavy. He estimated that there were hundreds of gold coins. Although these gold coins were not worth mentioning for his current vision and assets, but hundreds of gold coins was a cost that ordinary families would find difficult to earn in their lifetime. It could be seen that almost all the wealth in the world was in the hands of aristocrats and rich businessmen. The proportion of wealth was seriously skewed. He looked at his medal. One side was engraved with two hands holding a stone. It symbolized the stone was purified into gold. The other side was engraved with his code. It represented that he was an alchemist of the material faction. If he was an alchemist of the life faction, then the two hands would be holding a human head. It represented eternal life. Recommendation letter from the Alchemy College? Dudian looked at the other letter. He was surprised. He asked the old man, "Is there an alchemy college?" The old man glanced at him. "Of course. Your friend should have joined a long time ago. Ask her. Don't disturb me. Go." Nightingale looked at Dudian. "Let's go and talk." Dudian nodded and left. He followed Nightingale to the outside of the hall. Nightingale said as they walked, "The Alchemy College is the same as our branch, built under an ordinary college. There are all kinds of alchemy knowledge taught there, but the tuition is more expensive. Of course, if you have good grades, the tuition can be waived." Dudian was surprised. "Isn't it easy to be exposed?" Nightingale nodded. "The possibility of exposure is high. But we have the protection of the Dark Church. Unless there is too much movement, the Holy Church will turn a blind eye. So don't worry. The degree of safety is relatively high." Chapter 230. If your teacher doesn't teach you, then I suggest you go to the Alchemy College. You can learn a lot of knowledge there. Occasionally there will be alchemy masters who will come to give lectures and broaden your horizons. Nightingale suggested to Dudyan. I will. Dudyan nodded. He wanted to go to the alchemy college to find a way to restore his left hand. Nightingale smiled behind her mask when she saw him agree. She said, since that's the case, I'll be waiting for you at the alchemy college. Speaking of which, I can be considered your senior apprentice sister. I'll call you junior apprentice brother from now on. Your code name is too ostentatious. I'm afraid you'll get beaten up if others hear about it. Dean Riley smiled. He had thought of this code name on a whim. He didn't expect that no one would use it. Now that he thought about it, it was really arrogant. But it was also good to remind himself not to let a short period of ease and laziness erode him. Then I'll call you Senior Sister Nightingale. Dudyan changed the topic. Do you know any alchemy items that can treat fractures? I have a friend whose leg was broken by a stone. Fracture injury? Nightingale thought for a moment. I know of nothing but the Fountain of Life that can treat such an injury. But the price of the Fountain of Life is too expensive. Moreover, you have the authority to buy it. You can't buy it unless you are a star-level disciple. Fountain of Life? You don't know. Nightingale was somewhat surprised. Your teacher is really lazy. Didn't he teach you anything? The Fountain of Life is also sold in the Holy Church, but only the internal members of the Holy Church can buy it. This is the best healing medicine. Even broken bones can be repaired. It is said that it can also regenerate broken fingers. It is extremely magical. The Holy Church said that it is a gift from the God of Light, but in fact it was developed by the Dark Church. Nightingale said with a bit of disdain and pride in her voice. Dudyan's eyes lit up. How much is this thing? Nightingale saw that he was tempted. She immediately said, You should dispel this idea. This is not something that can be bought with money. The Dark Church uses points to trade. This Fountain of Life needs 5,000 points to buy. Dudyan wrinkled his brows. So expensive? Of course, it's a human life at the critical moment. Nightingale said, So, people like us who haven't stepped into the threshold of the star class shouldn't think about it. Although it's a pity that your friend's leg is broken, we can only let him get used to it. Dean shook his head. I'll go and see if the potion master has any solution. Nightingale sighed and said, Well, I still have some activities in the academy, so I'll go back first. I wish your friend a speedy recovery. After she left, Dean turned around and continued to inquire in other shops. Although he was told that in addition to the Fountain of Life, there was a kind of regeneration agent, refined by the alchemists of the Life faction, which could greatly heal injuries. But the price was extremely expensive, and there was no market for it. Dean couldn't help but feel disappointed. However, he wasn't too depressed as he had expected it from Nightingale's mouth. His eyes couldn't help but fall on the distant branch of the Dark Church. His eyes flashed for a moment, but he suppressed the impulse in his heart. He took a deep look at the dark nights that could be seen everywhere in the square. He turned around and sat in the carriage to return to the Ryan castle. In the carriage, Dean changed his clothes and took out the alchemy letter. He opened it and saw dense characters written on it. It was a poem written by a bard. Some of the sentences were not smooth. It was as if several poems were put together. At the end of the poem, there was a string of alchemy symbols. Dean saw the string of alchemy symbols and immediately knew how to read it. He read it according to the diagonal lines of the alchemy symbols. Blood Reef Alchemy College. Address: 109 Red Tower Street. Dean sorted out word by word. After a moment, he confirmed that there was no message left. He took out a match and burned the letter to ashes. When the carriage reached the suburban road, he put away the medal of the Dark Church. He wanted to find a secret place to hide it. It was dusk by the time he returned to the Ryan castle. After dinner with old Foulene, Dean went back to his room. He took out a pen and paper to write and draw. This time it wasn't a big piece of paper but a simple topographic map. Old Foulene pushed the door and entered the room. He looked at Dean, This is your cold crystal. He took out a gray bag and handed it to Dean. Dean's eyes lit up as he took it and opened it. There were 4 blue and round cold crystals inside. They were the 4 cold crystals that he had hunted. He was overjoyed. Thank you. Your business is my business. There is no need to thank me. There was a faint smile on old Fouline's face. Dean looked at him. I want to go outside the giant wall again in a few days. Again? Old Fouline looked at him in surprise. You just came back. The radiation in your body hasn't been digested yet. If you go outside the giant wall, the radiation will accumulate in your body. Moreover, your arm hasn't healed yet. Dean shook his head. Ordinary medical treatment can't cure my hand. I went to ask my friend, who is an alchemy warlock. He knows that there is an alchemy item that can cure my arm, but it costs too much money. Are you talking about the Fountain of Life? Old Fouline was surprised. Dean looked at him in surprise. You know about it? Our family knows a lot about alchemy warlock. This thing is also sold in the Holy Church, but only people from the Holy Church can buy it. If we are still a member of the Melon Consortium, then we can ask the Knights of Light under the Melon Consortium to buy it for us. Old Fouline sighed. A few days ago I went to the Scott Consortium hoping that they could help us buy it. But the price is too expensive. We need 50,000 gold coins. We only have 10,000 gold coins in our hand. We wanted to give them a credit but they didn't agree. Dean said, Don't worry about it. I'll solve it myself. Old Fouline looked at him and smiled. It's getting late. You should rest early. Then he turned around and opened the door. After he left, Dean's eyes fell on the 4 cold crystals in his hand. He immediately took off his shoes and went to the bed. He grabbed a dagger from the bedside table and cut his right finger. He took out a cold crystal and held it in his hand. The cold crystal quickly dissolved into a mucus and penetrated into his body through the blood on his finger. After a while, his whole body was alternating between extreme cold and extreme heat. When the feeling gradually subsided, Dean clearly felt that his physical strength had increased a little, and his thinking was sharper than before. One at a time. I can't be greedy. Dean put away the remaining 3 cold crystals. He didn't want his right arm to end up like his left hand. Dean continued to improve the previous simple map according to his memory. It was late at night. He felt tired so he lay down and went to sleep. The next morning, Dean got up on time. He ate breakfast and left the Ryan Castle. Once again he went to the Dark Church's branch. He wandered around, but spent most of his time in front of the freezer in the hall to observe the situation. There were dozens of people in the freezer, so it wasn't eye-catching. Time passed by quickly. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. On the 3rd night, Dean closed the door as usual to absorb the 3rd cold crystal. As the number of absorption increased, the feeling of extreme cold and extreme heat gradually faded. He could easily bear it. So much so that Dean was thinking about other things while he was absorbing the cold crystal. Suddenly he heard a subtle sound from his left hand. It woke him up. Chapter 231. Dean looked down. The bandage on his left hand was very tight, but there was no abnormality. Puzzled, he stretched out his hand and pinched it. Unexpectedly, as soon as his palm touched his left arm, he felt a cold feeling. It was like touching an extremely cold ice block. He immediately retracted his fingers. He suddenly remembered that when his left hand absorbed too much of the cold crystal for the first time, a large amount of ice seeped out from his pores. It was also so cold. He quickly cut the bandage on his left hand with a dagger and quickly peeled it off. Several plates used to fix the bones also fell, revealing the arm inside. Suddenly, he saw a layer of light blue crystal on the surface of the skin. There were faint contours on it like pieces of scales that were cut off. Each piece was the size of a thumb, spreading from the shoulder down, but the part below the elbow did not have any. Dean was startled. This light blue crystal was a bit like thin ice, just like the embryonic form of the last time when his arm was frozen. Obviously, I used my right hand to absorb it. How could my left hand have such a situation? Dean was confused. Suddenly, he thought of an explanation. Could it be that his left hand was necrotic, causing the cold absorbed by his right hand to pour into his left hand, but it was not digested by his left hand? While he was guessing, the cold continued to seep out from his left hand, condensing into ice-like light blue crystal scales on the surface of his skin. Seeing this scene, his face was very ugly. If the cold penetrated from his arm, then the water in his arm was likely to have been stripped off, which was a great damage to the human body. Moreover, the water was likely to be stripped from the blood, which completely cut off the hope of treatment on his left hand. Damn it! Dean gritted his teeth. Did he have to replace the prosthesis? Even if it was a prosthesis, there was no way to replace it with the current technology, unless he transplanted someone else's arm. He grabbed the quilt next to him and covered his left hand, hoping to reduce the speed of the condensation of the cold crystal. It would be better if he could melt the condensed cold crystal. After covering the quilt, Dean rubbed the crystal scales on his left hand. He felt that the crystal scales were extremely smooth. After a moment of rapid rubbing, he suddenly felt something was wrong. There was no water vapor on the cold crystal. He reached out and pressed it. He was surprised to find that the crystal scales were slightly concave like flesh. Although the flexibility was far less than the skin, it was completely different from ice. This isn't ice? Dean couldn't help but re-examine the crystal scales. He reached out and pinched it. If he used a little more strength, he could pinch the crystal scales. It was a pity that he couldn't feel his left hand. Otherwise, he could judge whether the crystal scales were closely related to his body or not. Dean immediately tried to bend his arm after knowing that the crystal scales were not hard ice. He found that his left hand was able to bend freely. It was not affected by the crystal scales. It didn't break like a frozen object. Could it be that the cold crystal energy in my body has mutated into a layer of scales on my left hand? Dean's eyes flashed. The appearance of special tissues in the body is generally a characteristic of senior hunters. When the potential of the magic marks is stimulated, the penetration of the human cell structure will become deeper and deeper, leading to mixing with each other. In some parts, some special tissues will be derived. Most of these tissues are the residual genetic information of the biological tissues that the magic marks had parasitized. Glenn should have such a special tissue, but she has hidden it. However, my magic marks have been stimulated for the first time and I have just become an intermediate hunter. The crystal scales on my left hand have nothing to do with magic mark. It was infected by something attached to the cold crystal. After all, the cold crystal is an unknown substance. It's too risky. Dean was aware of his boldness, but it was meaningless to regret. His main purpose was to increase his strength and kill Linda. However, his body was unknowingly changing in a direction that he didn't know about. The only good thing was that it was only his left hand that had an abnormality, not his whole body. Dean continued to observe his left hand. He tried to move it gently, although there was no feeling, but he immediately found that his left hand seemed to have recovered a lot. He could move it freely without any effort. Moreover, the shape of his arm was close to its original shape. The necrotic tissue and extravasated blood seemed to have been digested and disappeared without a trace. The material of the crystal scales is like the stratum corneum, but also like hardened biological glue. It is much softer than the hardened stratum corneum. Is it possible that the broken bones were glued together by this biological glue? Dean touched his arm. He wanted to dissect it to dispel his speculation, but he held back. He was happy and worried at the same time. He was happy that his left hand didn't seem to be crippled. There was hope of recovery. He was worried that he had never heard that cold crystal could heal injuries. What if the crystallization of his left hand spread throughout his body in the future? How would he treat it? At that time, could he still be regarded as a human? I have to prepare a bottle of fountain of life so that I can feel more at ease, Dean secretly thought. He took out a roll of gauze from the drawer and wrapped it around himself. At the same time, he decided to let old Foulin inform the middle-aged doctor that he didn't need to come back for a follow-up visit. 5,000 points. According to the trading points of the Dark Church and the market price, it is equivalent to about 20,000 gold coins. Moreover, only star-level alchemists can buy it. In this case, I need to spend at least 30,000 gold coins to buy a star-level alchemist to help me buy it. Dean quickly calculated in his mind. He couldn't use formal means, so he could only use other illegal means. In fact, it wasn't a violation of the rules, but the acquiescence of the rules. He fell on the bed and looked at the ceiling. He was lost in thought and unknowingly fell asleep. The next day, Dean had breakfast and was about to go to the Dark Church's branch. Suddenly, the butler brought news from outside. He looked at old Foulin, who was sitting opposite to Dean. "Master, someone from the Temple of Elements has come to visit you. Do you want to see him?" Old Foulin was surprised. He put down the newspaper in his hand and looked at Dean. His weather-beaten eyes flashed. "Call him up. I'll wait for him here." "Yes." The butler respectfully retreated. Old Foulin looked at Dean. "Are you going out?" "Stay here for now. This person is probably here to look for you." Chapter 232. A middle-aged gentleman, accompanied by the butler, came upstairs to the dining room. His eyes lit up as he saw old Foulin and Dean eating. He took off his hat and bowed to old Foulin. "Greetings, Patriarch. Is this Mr. Dean?" Old Foulin smiled. "Yes, this time you can talk to Mr. Dean personally. Although our consortium has recruited Mr. Dean, but the contract doesn't restrict his personal freedom." "That's great." The middle-aged man's face was full of joy as he looked at Dean. "Mr. Dean, you can call me Carrie. I don't know if you have heard of the Temple of Elements. It is the place where hunters bring back materials from outside the giant wall for final evaluation and identification. I'm here on behalf of the Temple of Elements to invite you to join us." Dean had a premonition when he saw the newspaper about him being an inventor. He didn't think that this thing would really come. He said, "I've heard a little about it, but I don't know much about it. Can you tell me more about it?" Carrie was overjoyed as he saw Dean's interest. "It's my pleasure. The members of the Temple of Elements are great inventors like you. We are also devout believers of the God of Light. Our job is to replace the God of Light to find the blessings of the universe and pass them to the nobles and civilians. There is a comfortable environment, generous treatment, and all kinds of materials. You can use all your talents and discover more blessings." Dean narrowed his eyes. "I'm a devout believer of the God of Light. I'm loyal to the God of Light. But I have a little doubt. I hope Mr. Carey can answer it for me." Carey laughed. "Mr. Dean, please say it," Dean said. "We're just discovering the blessings of the God of Light. Why aren't we called inventors? Isn't that blasphemy against the God of Light?" Carey was stunned for a moment. "Mr. Dean, you are mistaken. Our Temple of Elements was created by the Holy Church. How can we blaspheme the great God of Light? The meaning of invention represents discovery and understanding. It means that we not only discover but also understand the blessings of the God of Light. It represents our gratitude and awe. That's why we are called inventors," Dean said. "So that's how it was interpreted." Carey smiled and said, "Mr. Dean, please don't feel burdened. They are all believers of the God of Light. Inventor is a very outdated title in the past. Nowadays, no one uses it anymore. We prefer to call you God's messenger." Dean nodded. "Mr. Carey knows that I'm a hunter. Hunters pay attention to pragmatism and benefit. So what benefits will I get if I join the Temple of Elements? Carrie smiled. There are many benefits. The first is the material aspect. The Temple of Elements will give you a castle in the commercial district. If you perform well and become a senior architect, you will be granted a fief. The territory area will be the same as that of a noble. In addition, you will be paid 100 gold coins every month. The higher your status, the higher the reward will be. Dean's eyes slightly moved. There was some surprise and fear in his heart. How could the Holy Church grant ordinary civilians fiefdoms? Wasn't this the exclusive right of the military? Carrie continued to tempt him. In addition to these, the Temple of Elements will allow you to display your talents. You will not only get endless wealth but also supreme glory. Dean asked, "What do I need to pay in order to get so many benefits?" There was a little surprise in Carrie's eyes as he saw Dean's calm expression. But he quickly said, "You don't need to pay anything. As long as you join the Temple of Elements and complete the tasks given to you. In addition, if you find any inventions, you need to hand them over to the temple." "What tasks?" "They're all small missions such as appraising the value of the materials of the monsters outside the wall. Don't worry, we have professional god relics for you to use. It's okay if you don't know some of the missions, as you can swap them with other missions of the same level. Even if you don't know any of the missions, you can still ask for support," Carrie said while smiling. Dean understood. "I will think about it." Carrie saw that there was no yearning or expectation on Dean's face. He wanted to say something but hesitated. "Well, I'll wait for Mr. Dean's good news. Also, I want to tell you that the evil alchemists like to attack the architect. If you join the Temple of Elements, we will provide you with absolute protection. You will be free from danger." Dean looked up at him. "Thank you for reminding me." Carrie didn't stay any longer. He said goodbye to Old Foulene and left with the butler. Old Foulene looked at Dean after he left. "Do you want to join the Temple of Elements? There are a lot of benefits, but there are also some disadvantages. You won't be as free as you are now. But in general, it's worth joining. It's a dream for most people. Moreover, the little guy's threat is not wrong. You have created a new textile machine. Dark Church's followers will try to assassinate you. Although you are a hunter, assassinations are everywhere. They can use poison and sneak attacks to easily kill hunters." Dean understood this point. Hunters were strong but not invincible. It was difficult to defeat them, but it was much easier to assassinate them. "I don't have time for the time being, but I will think about it," Dean thoughtfully said. "If I join the Temple of Elements, then I will be able to buy Fountain of Life. Moreover, I will have the identity of an architect of the Temple of Elements. I won't suffer any injustice. It can be regarded as a shield for our consortium." Foulene nodded. He saw that Dean understood the stakes. "I believe that you will make the right choice." Then he picked up his crutches and left the table. Dean didn't stay too long after Foulene left. According to his original plan, he put on his coat and left the Ryan Castle. He hired a carriage and went to the branch of the Dark Church. For the next few days, Dudian became more and more cautious in the Dark Church's branch. He didn't want to be followed. There were dozens of people standing in the hall. They surrounded the freezer and observed it. They wanted to find a way to open it, but the freezer was protected by the iron cage and couldn't be touched. It was quite difficult for them to see the way to open it. Dean also pretended to observe, but his attention was focused on the surroundings. In the blink of an eye, another day passed. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.